Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Thomas Reed, and I'm the director of the Office of Communications and Business Opportunities. Welcome to the FCC's EEO Best Practices Summit. This workshop represents a joint effort by the Media Bureau and OCBO. Today we'll be discussing the current state of the EEO rules and how regulated companies navigate compliance. I'm excited that we are rejoining such an important conversation. We'll have two panel discussions. The first will focus on the regulatory framework impacting licensees, and the second will explore industry best practices regarding outreach to diverse communities. It is the FCC's mission to create policy that promotes a diversity of voices over the airwaves, to create policy that opens up opportunities for all Americans to participate in and benefit from a robust communications environment. We know that when it comes to minority participation in media, the numbers are not good. Minority groups comprise 34% of the U.S. population, yet they own just 3% of full-power TV and just 8% of full-power radio. Even more relevant to today's discussion is the question that precedes ownership. How do we create opportunities for diverse communities to increase their training and expertise in media-related fields so that we have diversity at all levels in the media marketplace? The fundamental outreach obligation of every media employer is to widely disseminate information concerning every full-time vacancy, wide enough to ensure that members of diverse communities are notified of the vacancies, not just on-the-air positions, but behind the scenes as well, engineers, traffic managers, sales and marketing, and so on. The needs of diverse communities must be part of the media framework, or the framework itself will be hopelessly flawed. As the Supreme Court ruled long ago, the widest possible dissemination of information from diverse and antagonistic sources is essential to the welfare of the public. We at the Commission continue to be concerned that all members of the American community have the opportunity to participate at all levels in the media marketplace. Not only is this good for media, it's good for the economy. In order to ensure this, diverse job seekers must be made aware of new opportunities at broadcast and MVPD facilities. We saw as recently as last week that the Commission will continue to propose fines where licensees publicize job openings without adequate recruitment. Inadequate dissemination of information about job opportunities displays a disregard for the Commission's rules and shows that licensees are failing to conduct sufficient self-assessment as the rules require. In addition to fines, the Commission imposes ongoing reporting conditions requiring licensees to submit annual documentation showing their compliance. The Commission continues to take these enforcement actions to put all licensees on notice that the Commission has made broad outreach a priority. So, as the FCC moves forward on its diversity agenda, we will continue to depend on industry participants and members of all communities for real and working definition of diversity. What are the issues that are unique to different cultures, races, and ethnicities? How does EEO policy and practice further our goals with respect to diversity? What are the most effective ways to reach diverse communities to give adequate notice of sought-after media employment opportunities? How do we create pipelines for diverse communities so that expertise and leadership in media can come from all walks of life? We at the FCC will continue to push for greater equality through enhanced diversity in media, both in front of and behind the cameras and the microphones. Thank you again for being here, despite the balmy temperatures outside. I never thought I'd pine for DC in August. I still can't feel my toes from this morning. So I'd also like to thank Dan Margolis and Louis Pulley, who are the principal architects of this event today. And as well, I'd like to thank our panelists who are going to lend us their expertise and their time for our edification. I'm looking forward to a lively and informative conversation. And further, I look forward to working with each of you as we pursue this important mission. Thank you, and now I'll turn things over to Dan, who's going to moderate the first panel.
Thank you. We have a tremendous amount of volume to cover here today, so I'm going to jump right into our panel. First, what I'd like to do is have our panelists go through and just introduce themselves and where they're from.
I'm Louis Pulley. I'm an attorney in the Policy Division of the Media Bureau, and I'm an assistant chief in the division, and I'm also head of the EEO staff.
I'm Cassandra Queen. I'm the Media Bureau Policy Division EEO staff. I am an EEO specialist and have been for a long time.
Hi, I'm David Oxenford, a partner with the law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine from their office here in Washington, D.C.
Good morning, everyone. I'm S. Janelle Trigg. I'm a member of Lerman Center. I'm also a former FCC staff of the Office of Communications Business Opportunities and had extensive experience in EEO, both from the broadcaster perspective as well as FCC staff. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melody Virtue, an attorney owner with the firm of Garvey, Schubert, Barrer, and I've been involved in EEO compliance with the FCC since I started out as a clerk typist before law school in 1979, typing transmittal letters for Form 395B.
Well, welcome. At this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Louis and Cassandra, who are going to do a brief background of the current status of the rules.
I know that people attending here in person and also via the web are have different levels of understanding of the rules or familiarity with the rules. So if you're already very, very familiar, then bear with me because I want to give first an overview of what the rules require and for broadcast and multi-channel video programming distributors, most of whom are cable companies, and then discuss enforcement. And Cassandra will also give her perspective as an EEO specialist who reviews renewal applications, license renewal applications, cable reports, midterm reports, and audit responses. The EEO rules for both broadcast and MVPDs basically are two main parts. The first is we prohibit discrimination in hiring practices and employment practices, and then the next, and that applies to all companies regardless of size. The second part of the rule for both only applies to those companies of a certain size. For television and radio, it's if you employ 5 or more full-time employees, and for the MVPDs is if you employ 6 or more full-time employees. And these are the EEO program requirements, and they include having to set up and maintain an EEO program for the hiring and recruiting, as well as filing various forms and providing different information. And the recruiting program that we require is a 3-pronged rule. First, and the most important part, is that you recruit for full-time openings and recruit broadly. And this is has always been our highest priority, and I've been an EEO for 21 years at the FCC, and this has always been our highest priority. That's basically what the rule is all about, is recruiting. And the next requirement is a little bit of an offshoot of that, and that is the requirement that if a legitimate organization requests to be notified of openings, then you are required to notify them. And the third prong is what we call the initiatives. And those are broad initiatives related to the broadcast industry or the cable industry, which are not necessarily, but could be, job-specific recruiting efforts, just to be of a general outreach nature to the community. And this in order to meet the requirement for this, again, it depends on size. If you're a larger station in a larger market, for example, you need to do 4 initiatives in 2 years. If you are a smaller station in a smaller market, it would be 2 initiatives in 2 years. And if you're an MVPD, then it's a 1-year requirement. either two initiatives or one initiative, depending on your size and the market size. But these initiatives are an area where we have a fair degree of confusion in the industry as to what counts or what the point is of this, and some people are kind of hung up on job fairs, and that is an important element, and it can be very useful, not only for the general outreach initiative, but also it can be a useful recruiting tool, and you can definitely claim credit for both. But it is not the only one. There's a list in our regulation of 16 different things that can be done, and overlooked quite often is just training of existing employees. And there are also other things, and you can also be creative about how you comply with that. But it is important that you comply, because from the very beginning, when we started issuing NALs, that is a notice of apparent liability or a forfeiture, from the beginning when we started issuing these, one of our first cases involved a station, a licensee, actually of 2 stations, who failed to do initiatives. And we decided that if we start giving a lot of leeway on initiatives, then we may end up without an initiative rule. And so we decided to set the bar pretty low on that one. And so if you fail to do enough initiatives, it's very likely that you would get an NAL for that. And in addition to that, if you fail to notify a source that requests notification, that is also highly likely to result in an NAL. And then I'd like to talk also about enforcement and how we enforce the rule. We started issuing NALs, although that's not the only enforcement tool, in my opinion, the way we look at the broad view of our enforcement program. But NALs are certainly, next to putting someone in hearing, it would be the highest form of a kind of a sanction that we have imposed for EEO violations. And we have issued 21 NALs against 75 stations for more than $254,000. And I cannot comment on pending cases. We just released 2 last Friday, and we have issued NALs every year since 2005. And we have more coming. I can't comment on anything pending, but we have some things that are pretty far along. And so more will be coming for 2012. And our main tool for enforcing the rules is random audits. We audit more than 800 radio and TV stations and about 55 to 60 MVPD units every year at random. We can also respond to complaints from any source notifying us of possible violations. We can also discover violations on our own and investigate. We are not enforcing criminal law. We are not the police. We're not the FBI. We do not need probable cause. If I am flying to Detroit and I'm looking at a TV station's website to see the weather report, I might look to see if the EEO public file report is posted on that website, and if it is not, that is a violation of our rules, and we may take action. But so if we discover violations, we always look into it. We don't automatically issue NALs in any case. We always check to see what's going on. But, you know, under any circumstance, if we discover violations of some kind, we may look into it further. And so we have done that. We've investigated people just because we just happen to be looking at a website for some reason, or because of an interesting news story or whatever. And in addition, the other and a very important way of discovering possible violations are for broadcasters are the midterm reviews, where at the midpoint of the license term. Now that has ended for this cycle, but the midterm reviews allow stations to send us their 2 most recent EEO public file reports. These are reports that stations with programs are required to create every year, once a year, and post on their website if they have a website. And we also look at license renewal applications, the Form 396, the EEO program report, where also the 2 most recent public file reports are required to be attached. The renewal cycle for radio just started June 1st of last year. TV is going to start June 1st of this year. And we have discovered a number of violations through that process. We will review approximately 700 or so license renewal applications every 2 months as they're filed. And in addition, for cable and MVPDs, we get annual reports, an EEO program report on the Form 396C, and we examine those. And once every 5 years, there's a supplemental investigation sheet, or SIS, which requires the MVPD unit to attach its public file report for our review. And then, of course, there's the MVPD audits. In addition, the staff I have instructed the staff that when we review cable forms for compliance on the Form 396C, that the specialists are supposed to check to make sure that the most recent EEO public file report is posted on their company website. And although we do not scrutinize the reports routinely, we do not review them thoroughly like we would with an SIS or a renewal application for broadcast, we do check to see if they're there. And if there are problems with anybody at any time, if there's a problem with a cable annual report or a renewal application or anything else that we may run across, we may keep investigating. And once we are aware that there may be a problem, we may just keep looking and keep digging and try to find out where all the problems are. And we may also initiate an inquiry or an actual audit for cause, which would not be a random audit. It would be an audit, a full-blown audit, top to bottom, of an EEO program and all the reports and underlying information, based on the fact that we've discovered some problems or irregularities, and we want to see completely whether there are violations in any area. And Cassandra can give a good perspective on from the viewpoint of EEO specialists. And we also have attorneys who do audits, but because we're in the midst of the renewal cycle and as well as doing audits, Cassandra can highlight some of the issues and some of the problems that we've had, and some of the ways that the industry and its attorneys can kind of keep the ball rolling and make things a little bit smoother or easier for everybody. And so I'll let Cassandra speak now on those aspects.
Yes, I've spoken to most of the specialists within the our office and also some of the attorneys as far as some of the issues that we have with filing the 396Cs, the renewals, and also the audits and the MVPDs. A lot of our concerns are the websites. We have a difficult time sometimes finding where the websites are, also finding the EEO public file reports on the websites. That has been a big issue with us, even with broadcasting the cable. It's been so difficult where we have to actually call the attorneys and ask them to call their clients to find out where their websites are for each station. Also, we also have problems with the calendar years. I guess the stations use calendar years instead of the anniversary dates of filing the reports. That has been a big issue, and we also have to call the attorneys or the licensees to find out, okay, the dates here, they're wrong. I mean, could you correct the dates? Another bad issue is attorneys and clients not responding to us. We call and we call and we call. We make even email, and they don't respond. It could be months, sometimes literally years, where we get no responses because we have to amend the reports because a lot of the information is missing from the reports. So that's been difficult. Also, some of the issues are the initiatives. We don't think that they take the initiative part seriously because a lot of times that information is omitted from the reports. And it says that, and a lot of times they should be more specific as far as what the initiatives are. And I think they omit sometimes training. That is an initiative, but I don't think they actually realize that that can be included as an initiative, and that's omitted. As far as the audit reports, we have been noticing that a lot of personal information has been included in the reports, whereas they don't have to be included. And we have to sift through a lot of the paperwork to find the information that we're looking for as far as the information in the audit. And we also said that most attorneys should take time, I guess, in filing the reports. We don't think that they actually look to see what they're filing until after we've called them and told them, okay, well, this is wrong. And they say, oh, we forgot this. So we actually ask that they take the time to review the information before they submit it to the commission. And also, I guess, check with their clients to make sure the information is correct. Because we actually have to call so many times each, and it's like every time we get a report, even it's the audit reports, it doesn't matter if it's the forms, the reports, we actually have to call the attorneys all the time to find out, can you amend the reports? Can you check with your client? Sometimes we end up calling the client, and the client actually gets a little disappointed at us, but we're only trying to do our job, basically, to get the information correct. And the thing with the MVPDs, the cable operators, we have actually, I guess, come to the conclusion that a lot of the operators do not know what the EEO public file report is. So I think they should be more attuned to the rules. And even those that may not have an attorney, they actually should, we tell them, can you please read the rules? Well, we don't understand the rules. You just have to, a lot of times we tell them, just, try to read and understand what the EEO rules are so you can understand what an EEO public file report is, and also the payroll periods on the reports. They're most of the time incorrect. So we had to ask them to correct that, and they still a lot of times don't understand what the payroll period is. We tell them it could be a week period, 2-week period, even a month period of the report of the time they used to file the report. It's a lot of other issues, but mainly our issues are, I guess, just the attorneys not responding to the. I don't mean to sound, kind of harsh, but that's our main pet peeve is the attorneys not responding to us and getting back to us in time, so we can finish. I guess complete our work. That's the main issue. That's about all I have.
I'd like to add on that this has been, it's extreme, as you can imagine. I mean, I just said, when we audit, we do more than, audits of more than 850 stations and cable units a year. And we also review about 700 at this time, soon to be more like 900 when TV starts, renewal applications every 2 months. It's extremely disruptive to our work. We want to get our work done, especially with the renewals, on a timely basis, so that renewals can be granted on schedule instead of being put on EEO hold, sometimes for months. But we will not clear any renewal for EEO. We will not allow a renewal to be granted until we are completely finished with an audit, if we have one pending for a station with a pending renewal, or a renewal application. It's going to be put on hold until we get the information we need. And even with that, we still have problems with people more or less procrastinating or delaying any responses. And what I have instructed the staff to do is start very, very quickly if we sense that someone's not going to respond. Send an email, possibly once, and if we don't get a response to that, then we'll send a certified letter. And in the certified letter, we will say we must receive a response by a certain deadline. And if we do not receive a response, then whoever it is, the cable company or the broadcaster, faces the possibility of getting an NAL for non-response to a commission inquiry, on top of the fact that there may be an EEO violation. And we may, in those cases, assume that there is an EEO violation and issue an NAL for non-response and an EEO violation. And the commission, although an EEO, when we have sent those certified letters, we usually get responses. The commission has issued NALs for non-response to commission inquiries. We have not had to do that in EEO yet, but we will do it if we have to.
Louis, Cassandra, you both have mentioned the EEO public file reports. Can you briefly discuss what information is required to be contained in those reports?
The regulation specifies what is required to be in the reports for broadcast as well as cable. And the regulation is fairly specific for both. And for broadcast, for example, it's Title 47, Section 73.2080, paragraph C6, and it lists 5 things, and those 5 things have to be in there. And as Cassandra has said, it's somewhat baffling to me sometimes that certain things, when we just say this report needs to be filed every year, 5 things need to be in it, and then we get the report and there are things missing. We understand that because, for example, with the initiatives, it's a 2-year requirement, and so it's possible that someone did not do any initiatives in one particular year, and that they're planning on doing them in the following year. But if they did not do any, the best thing to do would be to say, this year we did not do them, we plan to do them next year, because otherwise we're going to assume that it's missing. If you did not do any, and we are in a position, or even the public is in a position to review a public file report, because they are posted on websites, we're not going to miss it. It's not one of those attorney tactics where you have failed to comply with something and you don't want to draw attention to it, so you just leave it out. We're not going to miss it. If it's not there, we'll ask why it isn't there. And we'll usually ask in the context of saying, you know, there are many different things such as training that count as initiatives. Have you actually done any of these 16 things in the last 2 years? And that would be the question. And it's, especially with training, it's hard to avoid any training at all for any member of the staff in 24 months. But it is possible that someone has failed to do any initiatives at all. Just giving tours of the station or having the local TV weather man or woman go to a school and make a presentation, or having a station have a booth at a county fair or other things. Those types of outreach count as initiatives, and they may be unusual and a little bit off the wall, but it may be. But what we're talking about is the kind of thing that reaches people in maybe unexpected ways. And so the public file report for cable is in 76.1702B, and it's pretty much the same things. And but I want to make one little caveat, and that is that the record-keeping requirements are a little bit more extensive than what's required to be put in a public file report.
We've been talking a lot about wide dissemination. David, what is meant by wide dissemination, and why should a licensee be thinking about wide dissemination and judging if it has widely disseminated a particular job description or job opening?
Yeah, Dan, really, I think that's kind of the heart of the whole EEO effort, is to let the community know when there are job openings at a radio, television station, or cable system or other group that's regulated by these rules. Essentially, you're telling your community that there's a job opening, and the obligation is to provide that information on a wide basis where you're reaching all groups within the community. I'd like to characterize it as you're not using the old boys network for recruitment. You're not just using those traditional broadcast sources, word of mouth, the station's own internal sources, the station's own website, referrals from consultants, but instead you're reaching out to your community, either through media, other media like a daily newspaper that reaches all groups within your community, or even better, targeting all those various groups with notices to community groups, educational institutions, employment agencies, and others who'd be referring people for job openings in an area. Get the information out widely to all groups within a community.
Janelle, there's an exigent circumstances exception to the wide dissemination requirement. When does that exception apply? And does it apply if I really need to hire somebody fast for a particular opening?
Thank you, Dan. First of all, I'd like to thank Lou and Cassandra for job security. And I've had the pleasure of working with them here as FCC staff to two commissioners and as OCBO, and it's remarkable that attorneys don't respond. I think they're tired of hearing from the three of us. But the exigent circumstances exception, first of all, exigent circumstances means it's a situation that demands unusual or immediate action and allows people to circumvent usual procedures. To the FCC's credit, this exception was extended to this set of rules. It used to apply to only those situations where recruitment was not feasible, but these rules provide for a little more flexibility for a broadcaster or MVPD. It means that exigent circumstance, it is a rare occasion where you are not able to recruit or recruitment is not prudent. In fact, the Commission notes that if the availability of a talent is so unique and exceptional, it could be an exigent circumstance that a comparable talent is unlikely to be found by recruitment. This mostly applies to, in most instances, anchors, talent, over-the-air personnel. It does not extend to all circumstances in which you have found a preferred candidate. Now, if you have a departed employee, it may not apply unless you have duties that cannot be fulfilled by any other employee, part-time, temporary, or whatever. The exception will apply only in rare circumstances, and I think the staff emphasizes that. The Commission will also look at the entirety of a licensee's recruitment effort in assessing compliance. When you have an exigent circumstance in a recruitment position, a vacancy in your EEO public file report, you really need to explain why there was no recruitment for that position. You also need to document that, because it may come back to you in an audit, it may come back to you, that issue may come back to you if not recruiting for this position, in a public inquiry. So some of your detailed record keeping needs to be more complete for an exigent circumstance than it does for other vacancies. But it is an exception. I actually had a circumstance in my career as a broadcast sales and marketing executive, national sales manager and director of marketing. We had launching a 5 o'clock news broadcast for the station in Baltimore, and unbeknownst to the market, we could not recruit for the anchor for that 5 o'clock newscast. It was proprietary that we were going to launch a new program, and we had an open window of opportunity to secure the talent from another competitive station. That's not a position you recruit for. A, we didn't want anyone to know we were launching such a broadcast, and certainly we wanted a particular talent. That would have been an exigent circumstance.
Melody, there are other exceptions. Can you talk about some of those other exceptions?
Well, there would be exceptions for religious stations, but not insofar as, the only exception is you can make a religious qualification part of your recruitment, but you still need to recruit among organizations that would have the required religious affiliation. And that's a special rule for religious stations. So that's certainly one thing that is an exception. I would say your first rule of thumb is there are no exceptions, except for that emergency talent. They walked out on the job and you need someone who can get on the air that can't be replaced right away.
Or an engineer, for example. You could have a particular position of unique qualifications, unique skills, if you have no other backup engineer and you need to get an engineer on house as soon as possible.
I think there are also some exceptions, and certainly you guys correct me if I'm wrong, that apply to part-time employees. If you've got a part-time employee, or I guess a temporary employee who you've hired through wide dissemination, it's not just the kid who's your next door neighbor or the relative of somebody who's already on your staff, but you've advertised it in the newspaper, you've gone out to the schools and recruited for a part-timer, and you want to promote that person to a full-time position, you don't have to recruit in that circumstance. Similarly, if you're going to internally promote somebody, say you've got a salesperson and you're going to promote that person to a full-time person, to a management sales manager, you don't have to recruit for the internal promotion, moving the salesperson to the sales management position. I think the theory there is that you're going to recruit for the salesperson who's going to fill the slot of the person that's been promoted to the managerial position.
Right. And temporary employees are also covered under that. Temporary meaning that you're working less than 6 months. If you've got a part-time person, it's less than 30 hours a week. So I know the staff also has great scrutiny on the EEO public file report when you've got a lot of part-time people or a lot of temps and then they move into a full-time position without recruitment. So that's an area of scrutiny as well.
But you don't have to currently recruit for part-time employees.
Right.
Only if you want to promote them to full-time. At that point, you have to recruit for the opening if you did not previously recruit for your part-timers. So it's probably a good idea if you have a tendency to promote from part-time to full-time that you also recruit for your part-timers, so you don't have to then recruit for the full when you promote them to full-time.
Right, you recruit if you think they might be good.
But sometimes you won't know that until after the fact. So, and then with temporary, if you know it's only a temporary position, you do not have to recruit for that. But if it's like a probationary period and then you want to move them to permanent, you better recruit for them before that opening, before you make them permanent.
But also note that the part-time position is pending right now. It's pending a notice proposed rulemaking. The commission could change its policy in that. In fact, I'm just curious for staff, any word on the notice proposed rulemaking? Been pending for how many years?
Since 2002.
2002.
We have a pending rulemaking on part-time employees, and that I have not gotten any direction from anyone that somebody wants to move forward on that. There are a number of there are a number of options. The commission could decide not to require any recruitment for part-time, or it could require recruitment, or we could, we have some kind of definition of what we mean by part-time. But everyone here on the panel has stated correctly that at the current time, our rule applies only to full-time openings. But if you want to promote someone from part-time to full-time, we would allow that as a promotion. In fact, we encourage promotions of existing staff, but we would not regard it as a promotion if you did not recruit for initially for that part-time hire. If you recruited for the part-time hire through broad outreach, then you can promote them.
David, do I really need to post every opening that I have in the local newspaper, in the classified ads? That gets quite expensive.
I think that's always been a misconception of a lot of broadcasters, because the FCC in its report and order when they adopted these rules said that sort of a safe harbor, at least initially, was recruiting through a newspaper of general circulation that reached all groups within a particular market. And broadcasters, I think, hate to use the newspaper to recruit for anything. And it's their competitor. We don't want to buy ads there. And I don't think the FCC has ever said that you have to use the newspaper. If you're reaching all groups within your community without using the newspaper, then you don't necessarily have to use the local newspaper. Now, you have to be careful, because the FCC has made very clear, including in these cases released last week, that you can't just use internet-based sources. And that may be something that the FCC ought to re-examine going forward, because certainly in the 8 years since these rules were adopted, sites like Monster.com and a lot of the other job recruitment websites have become the classified ads of today. Newspapers are less and less reaching the entire community, and a lot of these internet-based websites have taken their place. So that may be something that the FCC would want to look at in the future, but at least for right now, you can't just rely on internet-based sites. So to avoid using the newspaper, reach out to a broad cross-section of community groups within your area: religious institutions, civic associations, educational groups, employment agencies. Send notices out to those people, find appropriate contact people at those organizations who will actually disseminate the information, use your own resources, and create a broad platform to get the word out, and you can avoid the newspaper.
Melody.
I would probably say that I look at using a newspaper classified as insurance. If you have a newspaper ad, the commission has almost said in some of these rulings that that's enough for broad dissemination, because they know that at least when they wrote these rules back in 2002, everyone went to the classified ads to look for jobs. That may have changed, and I think maybe the time might be right to petition for internet sources to substitute, because there are some local communities now that don't have newspapers. The newspapers all have online sources. So I'm kind of hoping someone will petition the FCC to show that, the allaccess.coms, the Craigslists, sometimes are the only places where stations get candidates that are, the ones they'd want to hire because they're qualified, and they get nothing from the newspaper. So I think times have changed, and it might be right for NAB or someone like that to petition the FCC to say, Internet's
Actually,
okay.
It is pending as part of some of the reconsideration requests from 2003.
And the priority is to have a productive recruitment plan. This is not just window dressing. You want to get the most qualified person on your staff, and you want to do it in the most efficient and in easiest manner, because you're still running a business. And from a management perspective, if the newspaper isn't working, you've got to find other sources. That's part of your self-assessment. And I would also note it's long overdue for internet recruiting, particularly since the Commission has acknowledged in its national broadband plan and other areas that the internet and broadband is critical for employment. In fact, in the broadband plan, they state that broadband-enabled solutions also address time, information, and technology barriers faced by disadvantaged Americans seeking jobs and training. So the broadband opportunity has become a change from when this rule was adopted, 2002. We're talking 10 years. So it's long overdue, I think, to allow broadcasters to manage their recruitment programs the most efficient manner and most productive manner. I love newspapers. I'd rather read a newspaper in person than read it online, but if it's not working for a particular station, the station has got, or MVPD for that matter, you've got to find another way to reach the people that you need to hire.
Melody, do I really have to recruit for a general manager or for an engineer when I know that an ad in the local paper or notices to local organizations won't be very likely to find me a candidate?
Well, the Commission recognized when it adopted these rules that that might actually be the case, but you still need to recruit. You need to try, and you can use sources that are likely to reach engineers or general managers. So you still need to make that effort to recruit. And it might be a national source like state, or a state source like State Broadcasters Associations or the Society of Broadcast Engineers or one of the engineering organizations. It might be recruiting at a local engineering college. So you can't just get a free pass for not recruiting for people with specialized skills. You really do need to try to find sources that will work, even if those sources may not be local to your community.
David, I recently hired a salesperson and I need to hire another salesperson. Can I rely on that same pool of applicants that I got from the previous outreach?
Yeah, there is some case law that basically says if that pool is fresh, the pool of job applicants that you've got, I believe the cases are 90 days, no more than 90 days or so old. You know, those people are still likely to be looking for a job. It's the same position that you're recruiting for. You can rely on that same pool of applicants. You don't have to go out and re-advertise just for the purposes of re-advertising. You know, that kind of ties into something that Janelle said earlier, that you're really looking to find the best person for a job. I get asked when I do seminars on these EEO rules in front of a lot of state broadcast associations, or just from clients who will ask, you know, do I really need to recruit for this position? You know, I've got a part-timer, and maybe I did a little recruitment before I hired that part-timer, and he's worked out well, and I want to move him into a full-time position. Or, you know, there's a temporary employee who's come in, and we got an employment agency who did some sort of search before the temp came in, and she's fine. We'd love to move her into a full-time position. Do I really have to recruit? And it seems to me that what the station should be thinking about is, yeah, you've got a person who could fill that position, but might there be somebody who's better out there? And by doing at least some recruiting, and the recruitment can be different for each job. You know, if you've got somebody who's good, maybe you don't do broad outreach to every single organization, but do some broad outreach, because what's the worst that could happen? You find somebody who's better than that person you were going to hire initially. So you really do want to make it effective.
I started my career in broadcasting because of the FCC's EEO rules. Now, granted, I crashed a VIP cocktail party, stalked the hiring manager, and talked my way into an interview, but I would not have been hired but for that they needed to fulfill an African American on the sales force. Now, granted, that was so many years ago under the old rules, but but not for recruitment and giving me an opportunity to interview, I would not have gotten my start in broadcasting. 8.5 years later with NBC in Chicago, I broke 2 sales records. I believe the last sales record is still standing, and I went on to become National Sales Manager and Director of Marketing for other stations. Now I represent broadcast stations, large and small. Recruitment is good business, bottom line. It is a way to do outreach in your community. It is a public relations tool to your very community. It's not just a job requirement. It's part of your localism. It's part of your character. And recruitment is important. At the same time, for sales positions, which I think are some of the problems and some of the hardest things for MVPDs as well as broadcasters to do, you are always recruiting for salespeople. That's your life and blood and money for the station. For those perennial, evergreen type of positions, your recruitment is continuous. So that applicant pool, it may be active all the time. It may not have a 3-month shelf life. It may have a longer term. But these are the things you need to look at to run your business.
Melody, I keep sending out these notices of job openings to community organizations that have requested notification of openings, but they never respond, and I never hear back from them. Is there anything that, in particular, that I should be doing?
Well, you should be reaching out to that group and saying, do you still want to receive our notices? If they say yes, you continue to send their notices. If they say no, take them off the list. And some of these organizations don't want notices of all openings. They only want certain type of openings. But you need to make sure that if they say they want them, that you in fact notify them every time you have that type of opening.
And I also note that on the supplemental recruitment initiatives, in fact, number 14, you've got a requirement that will allow you to do training at, I'm sorry, it's number 15, training to personnel of unaffiliated nonprofit organizations interested in broadcast employment opportunities that would enable them to better refer job candidates for broadcast positions. One best practice is for those requesting community organizations, why not have a breakfast for them once a year that you sort of renew your relationship with them? You can give them training and tips or things about how you like certain job listings or things that are helpful. It will not only give you a better relationship with those community organizations, make those organizations more productive, but it also fulfills a supplemental initiative that you get credit for on your EEO public file report.
Yeah, I think Janelle's point is very well taken. You know, a lot of these organizations are getting EEO requests or employment opening information to fulfill EEO mandates, not just from the FCC, but from other government organizations that have EEO requirements. Any government contractor has EEO requirements. Many other government-regulated entities have EEO requirements either under state or federal law. So some of these organizations kind of get inundated with notices of job openings. And, you know, a lot of times they take that piece of paper that they get and they toss it in the circular file. Oh no, another job opening. Unless they know who you are and have some sort of personal connection with you, your station or your cable system, they're not going to really pay attention and go out of their way to recruit somebody for your job openings. I once was doing a seminar at a broadcast association out west under the old rules, where a station had been fined for not doing enough recruiting and had reporting conditions imposed on that station where they had to go back to the FCC and report on what they had done to reach out to community organizations. And they had entered into a consent decree with a minority organization that had petitioned against their license that required that they would have regular meetings with certain minority and other organizations within their community to talk about job openings at the station, to talk about what some of these job openings really are. You know, some people outside the broadcast industry don't realize that an account executive is a salesperson. They don't know what a producer on a television show does.
My mother thought I was selling TVs.
Yeah, exactly. they don't know what some of these job openings are. And this broadcaster came up to me and said, hey, I got a fine and I had these reporting conditions, and I thought he was going to start yelling at me about all the obligations that had imposed on him. And instead he said, it was really the best thing that ever happened to me. I got to know these organizations out there in the community. I got a personal rapport with the people at these organizations. They actually started sending me people, some of whom I hired, and they also told me about events that were going on in the community that I could cover in my news and public affairs programming, and we built up a relationship with groups in our community that we had otherwise never been talking about. So building up that personal relationship is important to have an effective recruiting program, because otherwise people are not going to respond to these notices if you just blanket email over all the organizations within your communities.
Another thing I'd add is it's important that if a group says we want to receive your notices, to send them. But under the old rules, before these more recent ones were adopted in 2002, it used to be try to get as many organizations on your list as possible. And most of these folks hadn't asked for them and had no idea who you were or what you were about. And a lot of that is there are a lot of organizations and stations that continue to do that. And I'm thinking, have you ever gotten a referral from them? Maybe it's time to clean up your list. Because there's not this current obligation to hit every organization in the phone book with a job notice. The important thing is to reach out to groups that want them, and if you're not getting any response from them, clean up your list. I mean, the FCC has said it's not all about every organization in the community unless they specifically ask for it. Otherwise, you might be better suited to recruiting from other places like your newspaper, your on-air ads, your internet postings, your listservs with other community groups that you're actively involved in. You might be better served getting involved in an organization like, I like to talk about Alliance for Women in Media because I was a past president, but they have local chapters in different parts of the country. If you're actively involved in one of those organizations, that also counts as one of your recruitment initiatives. So there are ways to get more bang for your buck without, for your each notice, rather than sending to 40 different organizations that don't really care whether you have an opening or not.
Now, I would like to distinguish between outreach and recruitment initiatives, or I should say organizations, from the requesting community organizations that are part of prong 2. There is some concern that if you got an organization that requested to receive notices and you get no referrals, no applicants, nothing from them, you may not be able to drop them from your list. At least the FCC report and order reads that you still must provide them with that information if they request it. Is that correct? So if you have a requesting community organization, even if they're totally non-productive, but that's different than additional outreach to other community groups, other sources, whatever. So again, you've got 2 prongs. You've got wide dissemination to a variety of sources, and then you've got community organizations that request information from you. You must continue to give that information to them, even though you may not get any referrals or applicants.
Janelle, you mentioned these community organizations have the right to request notifications of job openings. Mm-hmm. How do they become aware? How do you reach out to these entities to notify them that they are aware to even ask for this, for these notifications?
Outreach, outreach, outreach. In fact, the actual prong under the FCC report and order is called Outreach Prong 2. You basically need to publicize that you have this opportunity, and that includes a press release, something over the air, certainly something on your website. As I mentioned, that kind of communication and relationship, certainly David expounded on, is important. So when you're out in the community and anchors and news people, salespeople, management are all in the community, you may want to ask community leaders, would you like to receive notices of our vacancies? Are there a particular type of job that you would like to get information from? And so you basically need to do outreach, you need to do your homework, and you need to document that. That's critical because the commission will want to know, have you made any effort to reach out to people? If they say no, you've at least tried. You're not obligated to force them to get your vacancies, but you must at least give them the opportunity to do so.
David, can you give us some examples of some of these community organizations that are qualified to receive these notifications?
Yeah, You know, a lot of times it'll be minority organizations or other organizations that deal with employment issues. I get the question a lot about who is a community organization. I get a request from some community organization that I've never heard of. Should I go out and investigate whether they're entitled to receive notice? You know, especially if you're sending your notices by email, why not include them? At worst, it's going to get you a referral from outside the old boys network, from outside that internal station source. So I'd err on the side of inclusiveness. If they're a community organization, they say they're a community organization, why not put them on your list and send them notices about job openings?
Pretty much, we would take a very broad view. We've always taken a broad view of who is entitled to notification if they request it. Because when we wrote the rules, there were some comments that we received where people were concerned that they may be actually harassed or inundated with requests, possibly just because they were overwhelmed with many requests from organizations, or because they were actually being targeted for harassment by various organizations. And there was also a question of whether someone could, under the authority of our regulation, demand to be notified and therefore have the right to charge money to the station for listing the job opening in whatever, perhaps a publication or something like that. And very early on, we said nobody has, pretty much almost anybody is entitled to be notified of openings if they request it. And we have never heard of anyone who was inundated or harassed. In the entire time we've had the rules in effect since March 10th, 2003. I have never heard a complaint that somebody was saying, we're just being overwhelmed with these requests, we can't handle it, where do we draw the line? We have actually heard of requests to be notified from organizations that said they wanted to charge them money. And we have said they are not entitled to charge you money. They are entitled to request notification, but they're not entitled to charge you to list the opening. So if they want to be notified, fine, you can notify them, but they don't have any right to send you a bill. And it's, as Melody said, it's a give and take thing. One of the key parts of our regulation is the requirement that stations and MVPDs self-assess how the program is working out. And in every case where we've issued an NAL, there has been included in the NAL a violation, as far as I know. There may be a couple of exceptions, but there's also been a violation of the self-assessment rule, because our theory is that if you're paying attention to your program, you're following what you're doing, you're actually analyzing it on a regular basis, trying to figure out how it's working out, whether the sources are productive, whether you're complying, then you're not going to violate the rule. And if you do inadvertently violate it, or if you lose some records or something, then you'll be on top of it and you'll correct it. And so self-assessment is very important, and it's fine with any source that you think is unproductive, even one that's requested notification. You're free to contact them anytime you want and have a dialogue with them and talk to them and say, do you want to still be notified? Or we've noticed that we've sent you 24 openings in the last couple of years. You've never sent even one referral. So do you want to be notified? And as she said, however, if they say yes, we still want to be notified, then you still notify them.
Just a quick housekeeping. If you have questions on 3x5 cards, Calvin is walking around. You can hand them to him. For those of you who are watching online, you can, or are streaming through WebEx, you can submit questions online, and we will take those questions. An online question that we did receive about community organizations. Is there a distance requirement or a distance limitation for that? If a community organization is requesting notification of job openings, but they're thousands of miles away, 3,000 miles away is what was posed in the online question. Does that community organization have the right to still receive notifications of job postings?
I would say that the station or the MVPD has a right to probably question them about it. But the thing is, the organization, not to single somebody out or anything, but the organization could be the NAACP. I mean, this is, the broadcasting and MVPD, the cable industries, are national industries. I mean, they're located in localities, but there are people all over the country who are interested in working in these fields. These are not, it's not like, I'm not going to name a name, but it's not like working at a shoe store, where there may be one in every shopping center in the country. A job in broadcasting is a unique thing, and working in a cable company or similar MVPD is somewhat unique as well. It's they are, they're career fields that have appeal to some people, and some people, especially the ones who may be getting a start or who may be looking to relocate or who are interested in certain areas, they may think, I'd like to live in Colorado, so I want to apply, but I want to work in these fields, so I'm going to apply to a lot of stations and or cable companies in the state of Colorado, and they may not live there. And the other thing about the internet is, so I would say yes. Generally, we would probably expect them to notify them of openings, and it's not really that burdensome to notify them, in our opinion. But the other thing is about the internet, we don't want to discourage anyone from using the internet. I mean, in our rulings that we've had as recently as last week, we have said, and we've reiterated our policy from paragraph 99 of our report and order that established the rules, where we said that the sole reliance on the internet is not going to be adequate recruiting, because not everybody has access to the internet privately. And we also said we would revisit that policy if we felt that was warranted. And at this time, I've heard no specific effort or request or formal request from the outside for us to revisit that policy. I've heard some, we've heard criticism, we've heard suggestions. There have been a lot of studies about internet access. There was a big one done last year, for example. But it's not something that we are inclined to revisit unless we have some specific reason to. At this time, the policy is you cannot rely solely on the internet and have adequate recruiting, but we definitely want to encourage people to use the internet. We want to encourage the broadest possible recruiting for every opening, and the internet is part of that. And we're aware that a lot of people use the internet for recruiting, and a lot of the websites are probably, and we've seen, because our rules require that people report the sources of each hire and the sources of referrals, and so we know that there are internet sources that are highly productive, but there are also other sources. And along the line of we were talking about the newspaper or the local paper or whatever that might be. One of the things we mentioned in the report and order was talking about, for example, newspaper recruiting, or how low a threshold we would have as far as how we define broad recruiting. And the fact is, if you use just one source that is highly productive and that does actually reach a very large cross-section of the community, just that one source may be adequate. And whether that source is a local newspaper or not, I don't know. But it depends on how the community uses that source. It could be a different source. But we do not require that anybody use the local newspaper or any newspaper, but we do require broad recruiting, and we require, as every member of the panel has emphasized, that the recruiting be from effective sources. And so, although we don't require it, there are a lot of sources that are free and are that we considered fairly broad, almost by definition. The state employment office in any state, the various local colleges in particular, or perhaps a state university, and like university, for example, in Maryland, the University of Maryland has a number of campuses. It's a very large university. It's obviously not necessarily, University of Maryland College Park is not in Cumberland, but nevertheless, it is a state university, and it's a big source. So a station can use that, and stations can also, and cable companies. So universities, state employment offices, various organizations, private organizations, sometimes community newspapers, and as well as internet sources. And all of these sources are, the goal, as Janelle has mentioned, is broad recruiting, and that is, and as David also has said, it's we want the recruiting to be broad, and we want it to be effective, and we want it to be meaningful. It's not we have seen a lot of programs where it appears to our staff, that people are doing the barest possible minimum that they appear to think will be in compliance with the rules. And I wonder about their commitment to any of this, and to whether whether it really means anything to them. But in any event, if it's in compliance, then that's all we can do.
Another online question with respect to prong 2, and then I want to move on to prong 3, the supplemental outreach initiatives. But another online question is, are broadcasters obligated to respond to talent agents or for-profit entities, headhunters, that request notification of job postings?
Like I said, we take a pretty broad view about who is entitled to be notified of job openings, and I think if these people are not charging anybody for their notification, then if somebody requests to be notified of openings, then I think that they're pretty much entitled to be notified of openings.
And why not do it if you're a station? It gives you another recruitment source.
Sure. Let's move along to the supplemental outreach efforts. Melody, what kind of activities qualify or count as these outreach efforts?
The Commission gave a lot of flexibility in this area. Excuse me. And, Lou had mentioned job fairs. I mean, that's certainly one way to do it. The rule spells out, there's the 16 different things. I have some handouts back on the table that also list every one of those 16 things, so I'm not going to go through verbatim. But you can do training that helps employees advance to higher positions. You can do mentoring. You can do internship program. That's a great opportunity. You can sponsor events in the community. You can help with educational institutions. Lou mentioned having the local weather guy talk to the junior high class. Some station general managers will guest lecture at a local journalism class at the local college. Those things all count. Anything that goes out to the outreach. You can have scholarship, so long as it's just not giving money, but you're actually involved in the planning of the scholarship, involved in the selection process and helping to organize it. You can design your own. I mean, the Commission's been very broad in what could count as an initiative. And one of those is just listing all of your upper-level job category openings, which means just about everything except clerical, by the way, with a media trade group. So if you're a member of the NAB, or you're a member of the State Broadcasters Association, or you're Alliance for Women in Media, I'll give that another plug, you can list all your top category, that means officials and managers, sales professionals and technicians, all those openings with one of those media trade groups. That's also not only your recruitment, but an initiative. And there's not a whole lot you have to do. I mean, if you're a small market, you've got 2 years to do 2 initiatives. If you're cable in a small market, you have 1 initiative in 1 year. If you're in a large market, meaning over 250,000 people, or more than 10 full-time employees, and more than 10 full-time employees, and you have 4 initiatives over a 2-year period. But a lot of the stations are already doing this kind of activity, and it's just a question of being organized enough to put it down in your record, so when it comes time to doing your annual report, you can add that to your annual report. So, there's a lot of flexibility in creating your initiatives. Lou mentioned some of them. How many Boy Scout clubs come on a station tour? I have a lot of clients who put that in the miscellaneous category, and I was glad to hear Lou mention that was an acceptable as an initiative. So, I see a lot of stations get involved with festivals, and if you have a booth at the festival, or you're doing a remote, put job applications on your table, or information about opportunities in broadcasting, even if it's not your own station. I would check if you have job information at your booth, wherever it is, the county fair, or remote at the supermarket, or a concert.
Yeah.
You can count that as this is not hard to do. It's just a question of keeping track of it.
A question that we've gotten from the online audience, do non-commercial religious broadcasters, small market, have the same requirement, 2 and 2?
Well, the religious broadcasters, and I might punt to David on this one, since he represents more religious broadcasters, and I tend not to represent too many religious broadcasters that run into this problem.
Religious broadcasters still have an EEO obligation, but for those jobs that they consider to require religious qualifications, their recruitment is within those members of that religious organization. So if there are particular jobs that they designate as requiring some sort of doctrinal affiliation, and it may be every job at the station, they have to at least recruit among people who share that religious affiliation. So reaching out to churches or other community groups in which members of their religious affiliation would be part, they have to do those outreach efforts, and the numbers aren't any different.
But if there are at least 5 full-time jobs that are not under the qualification for religious doctrine, they have to complete fully prong 2, which is the outreach to the community organizations, as well as the supplemental initiatives. So if there's a religious organization that has both positions that are subject to the doctrine and then those that are not, they may have dual EEO responsibilities, and I would suggest they consult with counsel to basically clarify what parts of the program they're apt to have to do.
But I actually have a question for the EO folks, because I get this question a lot, and we really haven't had a ruling on it. If someone's involved in an internship program in 1 year, and they continue it another year, is that 2 initiatives, or is it 1 initiative over a 2-year period? Or a scholarship?
I would say it's 1.
Okay.
If you have the same person, and we have interns here at the commission who are here for the whole school year, for example. They start in the fall and they go all year through the spring, and then we have others who come in for 1 semester or just the summer. And they have, now the regulation actually says establishment of an intern program, and we really never intended it to be as narrow as that, where you get credit for doing an initiative if you set up an intern program, and that's it. And once it's set up, you
It
never
doesn't
get
keep
credit
giving,
again.
huh?
That's not what we meant. Because we want to, we want to encourage internships. So what we mean is, the way I've interpreted it, and nobody's really challenged this, although again, it's my opinion, but it could be overruled. But what I have said is that if you have an intern program at your station or cable company, and you have like a set competition and you publicize it and so forth, you have a competition and you select one or more interns, then that would be considered 1 credit as far as initiatives on interns go. And then you do it again, start all over again, do it all over again, like in the summer. And you do it in the fall and you do it in the summer. Then I would say that counts again as another intern program. If you have one competition and you hire 4 interns all at once, I would not say you get 4 intern credits for initiatives. But if you had 4 totally distinct competitions over a period of 2 years, then I think that could count as 4 initiatives. There are a lot of companies we've found that have a lot of things that count as initiatives, and that's because they know if anybody looks at the list of 16 things, so much of that is just good PR, and it's good outreach.
And good business.
And good business.
Yes.
Because if you're in the broadcasting business, you're not an insular, quiet, private little boutique. You are in literally broadcasting. I mean, you're out there in the community, and you want as many opportunities to kind of sell yourself and promote the station and what you're doing, and get as many listeners and advertisers as you can. And so almost any kind of a positive publicity is a good thing. And so the station tours, the sponsoring of an event, the appearance at an event, very publicly covering an event, doing appearances in the community. I will have to mention, I'm not going to mention his name because I know he'd be very embarrassed, but my cousin was a sportscaster on television and station and in a rather large market at one time, and he was, when he was a little younger, he participated in a charity auction where the prize was a date with him for a dinner. And he was extremely embarrassed to go through that, and kind of privately he was telling the family, he said, it made me feel like I was in a meat market or something. But the thing is, it was for charity. It was just to be nice to somebody, and he was popular in the community and well-known, and that's kind of an unexpected thing. I wouldn't call that an initiative, really.
I was going to say, does that fall under miscellaneous?
No, I don't think even that. I don't even think that even qualifies under paragraph 16. But there are some kind of unexpected little opportunities that stations have, and so quite often they undersell themselves to us when they're reporting initiatives. Others are well aware of what they're doing, and they tell us all their initiatives, and there's quite a few of them listed. And and certainly we want to encourage as many as you can.
Is there any rotation that's required, or can you continuously do the same?
That's another thing we've been asked about is, if somebody says, well, let's say we sponsor, you get full credit for sponsoring a job fair, for example, and they say, well, we have this job fair every year, and with maybe a local university or something. And no, there's no requirement that you vary the types of initiatives that you have. I mean, you can have 4 of the same thing or 2 of the same thing.
Janelle, there are some activities that that require completion of 4 events, and some that require completion of 2. Can broadcasters mix and match?
Absolutely. This is an a la carte menu. You can do a combination of things because, again, you want to design your supplemental recruitment initiatives to reflect your business goals, your outreach, your staff limitations, your budget. I mean, this is still a business decision. So you can do mix and match what works best for you. For example, to get 1 credit for a broadcaster, and again, the requirements are different for MPDs in terms of how many initiatives you have to do. Assuming that you have 5 or more employees and you are not full-time employees and you're not in a small market, you can get a half credit for participation in 2 job fairs. Again, this is over a 2-year period. You can get a quarter credit for, say, a speaker at a community college unique job seminar. You can get another quarter credit for sponsorship of a career day at your church. That adds up to 1 full credit. And note that some of these initiatives, supplemental initiatives, can also qualify under multiple prongs of this. And one question I have for staff, for Lou, we've had some debate whether a station, for example, can sponsor a job fair, which is, again, gets you a credit, and also get additional credit for participation in the job fair. They fulfill the requirements for both, but it's the same event. Can they get the multiple credits for it?
That I would not, I wouldn't think that.
Well, again, your sponsorship says that you have to be involved in the planning. You have to do more than just give money. So if they're involved in the planning and they're involved in setting it up, they may even host it on location. But then the additional credit would come from, say, the sales manager, who is not involved in the planning part, but he's the one that's working the booth. Why wouldn't you get 2 credits for the same event?
Well, what you're getting there, I think what you would be talking about is like one and a fourth credit.
Correct.
And
because you only get a quarter credit for participation, you got to do 4 job fairs. So, do you get 1 and a quarter if you host it, sponsor it, and you got the GSM sitting there doing the recruitment part of
you
it?
definitely get the full credit for the sponsoring or co-sponsoring.
Mm-hmm.
The only question is whether you would be entitled to a 1/4 credit for actually participating in the exact same event. And I just don't know. I mean, I don't think so, but I'd have to check with people above my level as to whether they would want to give credit for that.
Great, I'll follow up.
I'm just not sure. It's not like an open and shut answer on that one. I think it's almost kind of like, to me it sounds like you're kind of doubling up on the same thing, but because I think the assumption is, our assumption is if you're sponsoring, then you're going to actually be there and take part in it, but that's not necessarily the case.
A different spin on the doubling up question that we've got from the online audience is when we've got job availability notices at community events, such as a walkathon booth, and we've got job availability notices at that walkathon booth, does that count as an outreach initiative as well as recruitment for the positions listed?
I would say yes, for both, yes, because you can definitely get double credit. Usually the question, there may be a question as to whether you're entitled to credit for recruiting, let's say if you're sponsoring a job fair, and people actually come up to you at the job fair and are interested in working at your station, and you actually have openings at that time, and some people may even fill out applications. I would say, obviously, you've sponsored a job fair, so you get initiative credit, and you have openings and people are applying for them at the job fair, so you can use the job fair as a recruitment source. Mm-hmm. So the same thing in your example as well. I think people can be entitled to both, but it depends. It's not automatic. You have to look at see whether the entitlements are each present.
And I'd note that in your EEO public file report, you have to list the referrals from all of the vacancies and positions, that's a perfect way to show that your job fair was effective. When you have a position and you also show that these folks came from a job fair, not just from an ad in a newspaper, et cetera. So yes, you should get double credit. And it's also part of your self-assessment to know that your job fair participation is also working. These folks are part of your applicant pool.
I have a question for Blue and Cassandra on an initiative that I've been seeing recently, and I actually think it's pretty spot on. The rule says participated in job banks, internet programs, and other programs designed to promote outreach generally that are not primarily directed to providing notification of specific job vacancies. How about engaging the audience through social media like Facebook and Twitter and tweeting openings and things like that? I know that social media wasn't a phenomenon when these rules were adopted.
In 2002.
There are a lot of, I've noticed quite a few stations and cable companies are very, promote themselves on Twitter and Facebook and so forth. They want people to become their friends, or they want people to check their site on those websites and follow them, as they say, as they put it, and check up on what they're doing and what they're saying. And the way this is worded, I don't think, I'm not really sure, I just don't remember offhand whether anybody anticipated in 2002 some kind of a social media phenomenon. But we're talking here about participation in job banks, which would be a job bank, which this was not necessarily be. But it also says internet programs and other programs designed to promote outreach generally. And I think any of the social media that would be considered an internet program. And the other programs designed to promote outreach generally, I mean, these are areas where a station or MVPD is trying to reach out to the community in a way that goes beyond merely having a company website. I mean, the website itself is a way of reaching out and has some information and maybe even some interaction, but it's not the same as a more personal and directly interactive presence like you get with blog postings and comments and so forth, and sometimes people answering questions and posting, dialogue and so forth. So I don't know. I think that might count. I'm not. We wrote these to encourage the maximum amount of general outreach, and certainly this is becoming an increasingly important way of reaching out to people, and the stations encourage it, and they sometimes advertise it, and they put those little logos on websites and announcements, and sometimes even the paper letters that they send to people and so forth, brochures and other things, handouts. Sometimes when they go to some public event and they have some little brochure about, like here's Weatherman Dave's weather guide or something about wind chill factors and other things, and where to check for weather advisories and the specific location on their website about how to check for updates on severe weather. And then across the bottom of the page, it'll have all those, the Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. So they promote it quite a bit, and that's, I don't know, it's not it's certainly not a job-specific thing.
Well, and your miscellaneous prong 16 notes that this is participation in other activities regarding employment opportunities, broadcasting to job candidates who might otherwise be unaware of such opportunities. you've got a unique audience when you're doing social networking. These young people, most definitely are not reading the newspaper. So here's a way to reach out to new folks. So I'm glad to hear that you are adapting to new technology. Thanks, Lou.
I think that's, what we're looking at is slightly unconventional ways of reaching out to
Right.
people and reaching out to
You said be creative.
people who
That's
are
good.
not traditionally, you go to a college where you go to communication school. Obviously, those students are interested in broadcasting or something in communications, and these would be this would be a non-traditional. This would be an example of reaching quite a few people in the public. Not everyone, but certainly one group.
There also is a credit for management training on EEO efforts. So everybody who's in the audience, share this archive of this program, and you've got some management training on EEO programs.
And I'd also note that the trade associations have excellent programs. NAMIC, for example, through cable, as well as NAB and the National NABEF. Participation, you don't have to do supplemental initiatives on your own. Particularly if you are a small station, again, with 5 or more employees, which are subject to this, you can partner with other stations, you can partner with other organizations, you can partner with trade associations or other community groups. Again, it has to fit your business and budget. So,
I want to move away from the outreach and to a different area, compliance, auditing, and enforcement. We've only got about 15 minutes left and want to move through some of this material. In the audit letters, the FCC asks about self-assessment. Janelle, what does that mean, and what do I need to do to comply with that self-assessment?
Lou mentioned a little bit about self-assessment in terms of evaluating your EEO program. I would say it's a little further than that. You need to also look at the EEO recruitment efforts, your outreach initiatives, basically your hiring as well, and your entire process in bringing in new people in employment. It's your entire employment scheme. It means that you have to look at whether your recruitment program is reasonably calculated to reach the entire community. So you look at, we talked earlier about different sources. Are these sources productive? I'm not talking about the community organizations necessarily, those that are requesting, but the other organizations that you're using. Are they reaching qualified and diverse candidates, quite frankly? Granted, you don't have to hire minorities or hire women, or other persons with other ethnic or other types of characteristics, but you certainly should look at reaching a diverse audience, which is the whole reason behind the EEU program, is to make sure you are reaching your entire community. One of the best practices in terms of recruitment, I think that you really should look at each individual job category and your different characterizations of jobs. For example, your administrative positions, you may only use certain sources for that. Your engineering positions, you wouldn't necessarily use the local newspaper for that. Are the sources you're using productive to reach qualified personnel? As well as additional requirements for those companies or those entities that are subject to other federal rules. You may have hiring requirements if you are a government contractor and you're receiving money from the government for advertising, U.S. postal ads, Army, Navy, a variety of ads such as that. Census, for example, was a big deal. You may have additional employment requirements. All of this is part of your overall self-assessment. Are you recruiting? Are you recruiting on a wide basis? Is your recruitment productive? And if not, what changes, what evaluations and things have you made? Now, your whole self-assessment also needs to be documented, because the commission will ask about your self-assessment in your audit. And you really should document, when did you look at these resources? When did you look at each vacancy? When did you look at, note the date, note the letters to the organizations in terms of how many job referrals or recruitment or whatever.
David, when can I expect to receive these audit letters from the commission? How often will I be audited? And what information do I need to have ready to supply to my lawyer or to the commission directly?
Sure. Basically, the FCC has said 5% of all stations will be audited on an annual basis. And Lou or Cassandra, did you say about 800 stations last year? Yeah, so about every quarter or so, we see a list come out of broadcasters or cable systems that are subject to audit. And at that point, you've got to provide your last 2 years' worth of public inspection file reports. But not only do you have to provide the public inspection file reports, but you also have to provide the background data that's not normally in your public inspection file or not normally on your website with your public file report. So that's letters from the Boy Scout troop saying thank you for escorting us through your station, or it's a note saying that your weathercaster went out to the local community college to speak to a class. It's background information like copies of all the emails that you sent out to your recruitment sources, information about documentation about where the referrals came from for particular job openings. It basically backs up all the information that you've got in those public inspection file reports so that the FCC can verify what you said in those reports is accurate. In addition, as Janelle just mentioned, you've got to talk about self-assessment. What you've been doing to look at the recruitment efforts that you've engaged in to make sure that they're successful, and how you've changed your policies over time if they haven't been successful in the past. So basically what the FCC is doing is they're looking to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. One thing that has been a problem, and the FCC has been very helpful on this, is that your audits affect all stations within your station employment unit, but the audits are triggered by the station, one station's call letters being essentially pulled out of the hat. We've had situations where one station in an employment unit in a local cluster has been audited on one audit, and then 6 months later, another station in that same cluster gets audited again. And I think the FCC has taken the position of, 2 years that you get a pass from having to be audited again from the same organization. Yeah, so, if your station's in Topeka, if one of them gets audited and another one gets hit by an audit list 6 months later, you can call the FCC and they'll put that off so that you don't have to do that any more than about 2 years apart.
The key for us is whether we'd be looking at the same information. And so in the case of MVPDs, it's almost never the case because it's a one-year review. We'll almost never be looking at the same information twice. But with broadcasters, we look at 2 years, and so if we would be, there's no point in auditing the same thing twice. So that's why it's roughly a 2 year, roughly 2 years. And the other thing is, we decided a long time ago when we did actually our second batch of audit letters. In fact, we discussed it when we did our first batch of audit letters in May of 2004. What to do about somebody who was randomly selected to have an audit where we would not be reviewing the same thing twice, but it would be a back-to-back audit where we'd review a 2 year period. And then we'd send an audit letter, someone chosen it completely at random. And we'd be looking at a new 2 year period. So we'd be looking at 4 straight years. And the decision was made, well, it's supposed to be random. So that's it. And I was waiting to get the first example of a back-to-back-to-back audit to see what the Bureau wanted to do with that. And they said, go ahead with it. And I thought, well, okay. Fine, we'll go ahead with it then. It's very rare, but that did come up once. And
Melody, when a station prepares an EEO public file report without help from counsel, and you're subsequently engaged to review that report, what are the biggest problems that you see?
Well, there are a variety, but I would say for those who are well-informed about the requirements. The one missing thing that usually pops up is their failure to note whether any organization requested that they receive notice of organizations. But that's a minor detail that can be fixed because they usually know whether or not that's the case. A lot of it is not being detailed enough in what they're doing in their general outreach initiatives. As Cassandra mentioned, sometimes the details are lacking. And I think it doesn't need to be an elaborate discussion, but you need to explain at least enough about what you did. So if you were at a job fair, you should have the date, you should have the group that you sponsored it with or who was hosting it, and who from the station by title attended it. And you should think about that in all of your initiatives. Who by title, I wouldn't use personal names for privacy purposes, but the general manager or the sales manager was involved in teaching the journalism class at this school on this date. And sometimes those particular types of details are not there. And then the other sad part is not having a sufficient, full enough recruitment for particular openings. But those that have been doing this for a while and understand the rules, it's the little things that they miss, that they don't know that they need to do.
David, do these EEO issues come up at renewal time? And if so, how?
Certainly. At license renewal time, you submit a form that includes 2 years' worth of your public inspection file reports. As Lou and Cassandra talked about earlier, they'll look at them. And the cases that we saw come down last Friday were cases that came up at license renewal time from the review of what was submitted with license renewal applications. So you better get it right at license renewal time.
How are forfeitures calculated? What are the factors that can raise or lower a total forfeiture if a broadcaster becomes subject to one? And what does it mean to have reporting requirements imposed on a licensee? Louis?
At this time, we have, like I pointed out in my initial comments, we've issued about 21 NALs, and so we have quite a bit of precedent set by now for different kinds of violations of our EEO rules, and so we look now to our body of case law for the most part to find the amounts of forfeitures. But some of the things that can cause, there are aggravating and mitigating circumstances in any particular case. One is the type of violation. Like I said, our top priority is a failure to recruit or recruit adequately. And so those are more likely to result in higher forfeitures. And the more violations there are, or the higher percentage of violations there are, the higher the forfeiture amount will be. For example, if you had 10 openings and 3 of them were defective, where you failed to recruit, then it might be a fairly low forfeiture for that. We would also include a forfeiture for failure to adequately self-assess. But if you had 50 hires and 49 of them were where you failed to recruit, then you would probably get a commission level as opposed to bureau level forfeiture, because we're at the bureau level, the delegated authority is $20,000 maximum. We would probably send that to the full commission and ask for a much higher forfeiture. But there are also mitigating circumstances. Like I said, if it's very, very few violations, or if we see some evidence of some corrective action where people tried to fix a problem, we may give some credit for that. If someone brings a problem to our attention, we try to give some credit for that. In a case where, that would be a case where we would actually not normally know about a problem. We would try to give some credit for that. But if it's an actual violation that warrants an NAL, then they'd probably go ahead and get a forfeiture. But we would try to do something, perhaps to lower the amount, because of course we always want to encourage someone to self-report. in cases where we're not already looking at an audit response, for example. But we issue reporting conditions in all cases of NALs, and occasionally we have issued, over the last several years, we have issued a few admonishments where there was no NAL, but there were also reporting conditions. So we've issued reporting conditions in all the NAL cases and also some other cases where there were no NALs. And in reporting conditions, we usually issue them for 3 years. And what it means is the station or cable company is required to give us a report, and we usually have it due 1 month after the normal public file report is due, so they have some time to not only prepare the public file report, but also prepare the additional information in the reporting conditions report. And what happens then is they file a public file report and give us some additional information, sometimes tailored for their particular case. For example, if they had done a particular thing, if they had a particular failing, other than just failing to recruit adequately, if they had had record-keeping violations and some other violations, we would, might ask for a few additional pieces of information to demonstrate. For example, if they had failed to do any initiatives, we would ask probably for additional documentation of initiatives, and we would, we then review those reporting conditions reports, and we send a response, a written response, in every case, saying, whether it was adequate or not. And we have actually issued NALs in response to some of the reporting conditions reports because they have revealed continuing violations.
And I also note that the reporting conditions may extend to a successor licensee as well. In fact, the last 2 NELs you issued right before New Year's Eve, you imposed them on any successor licensee. Ordinarily, if you buy a station, you're not bound by the EEO, the previous owner's EEO requirements. You start afresh. But in this instance, if the station is subject to sanctions, you inherit those sanctions, which may certainly make you reconsider whether you purchase the station or what price you pay for the station. So it could affect the ability to sell and to transfer control of a particular licensee.
And that is a policy that we've had for quite a while, and that's a policy that we issue in all of our reporting conditions. I'm glad Janelle brought that up, because we view these EEO violations, when it comes to the reporting conditions, as kind of like a building code violation. That you buy a building, although you're not responsible for anything that the previous owner did, which is consistent with our EEO policy. We do hold you accountable for whatever's going on from day one, from when you become an owner. And so if you buy a building with code violations, you're expected to fix them and make sure that they don't come back. And quite often now, there's one scenario that we have never seen, and I'm not sure what the commission would say about it. And certainly we don't want to encourage anyone to do this, because we never want to encourage people to fire people. But if you buy a station and the entire staff is replaced, and you could say to us, we shouldn't have to continue to do reporting conditions because we have 100% new staff. Every single violation that this old staff is responsible for, all those people are gone, and all of our people are here. So it's a 100% new ball game. We might entertain that, but I don't know. I don't know what we would do.
But I'd also note that if you fire your entire staff, you still have to go through the whole recruitment process.
Yeah, but then you'd have to recruit for every single opening.
Prong 1, prong 2, and prong 3,
yes.
Right?
Yes, you'd have to recruit for all the openings.
Yes.
Well, I understand that if someone's buying a station and they, as a formality, have the seller fire on the day of closing, and then the buyer rehires the same people, you need to recruit for those?
No, we've said that if you keep the existing, you're certainly, you have the option, in fact, we would even encourage you to keep the existing staff. And if you want to, and you want to keep the existing staff, you can do that, and you don't have to, although technically, if you're a new licensee and you keep existing staff from the old licensee, you have hired them on the day that you consummate the purchase and you become the owner. We don't consider that a new hire, and so you can do that. We also we audited a cable company one time where they said that they questioned our policy on temporary hires, and they said, whenever we hire a new person for a full-time position, they're on probation for 3 months. And so does that mean that 100% of our hires are temporary hires? And we said no. We would say 0% of your hires are temporary hires unless you intend to keep them for only a few months. If you hire a new employee with the intention of hiring them permanently, if they work out, even though on your books, technically they are on probation, they're not considered a temp or a probationary employee from our perspective. We consider that a full-time hire.
Well, we're running a little bit over. I just wanted to take this opportunity to, on behalf of OCBO, thank our panelists. Louis, Cassandra, David, Janelle, Melody, thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, for your expertise, and for sharing with us today. We will be taking a 15-minute break, and the second panel will be beginning at approximately 11:15 to 11:20.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of good information.
Get started again. It's about 11:20. I'd like to welcome everybody back. Again, I'm Thomas Reed, Director of the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. First, I'd like to thank our first panel, Louis Pulley, Cassandra Queen, David Oxenford, Janelle Trigg, and Melody Virtue for their work for us this morning. Before we get started, I'd also just like to remind everybody who's watching online that this is fully participatory, and please do send us your questions for this panel. And everybody that's here, sitting with us today, feel free to share your questions with Calvin Osborne, who will be handing around index cards. For my purposes, it'd be great if you can identify yourself and the organization you're with, so I can call you out publicly as I ask your question. And otherwise, I'll have my questions for the panel as well. So I want to welcome them here. Thank you all for coming. Bob Winteringham, Monica Johnson, Lori Cagonia, and Cheryl Manley. And I'm going to give you all an opportunity to introduce yourselves, tell us what company you're with, and tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump in. All right? Starting with Bob.
Hi, my name is Bob Winteringham. I'm the Deputy General Counsel at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I sort of bring a unique perspective to this, and let me give it by way of background here. CPB, as most of you know, is certainly not part of the government, but we and by statute, in fact, we're a private nonprofit, but we are the ones that receive the funds from Congress to help assist with public broadcasting and then distribute it out to the system. And actually, even though we don't own any of the licenses, in fact, we're statutorily prohibited from owning any of the licenses of the stations that we help support. There are 5 things in the Communications Act, the public broadcasting provisions of the Communications Act, that we are charged with enforcing. In that the way these 5 provisions are written, it's that unless the stations that we help support, unless they certify to us that they're in compliance with these 5 provisions, we are not allowed to give funds to them. And one of the 5 provisions in the Communications Act is specifically about EEO compliance. And So what we do is we do rely on self-certification for the stations that every year as part of their application for the Community Service Grant, or CSG, which is our main operational grant program. They do certify that they're in compliance with EEO, the EEO provisions in the Communications Act that pertain specifically to public broadcasting. What those are in a nutshell is it's sort of a two-pronged provision. First, that they are certifying they are in compliance with FCC EEO rules, so it sort of dovetails nicely. And then secondly, they have to fill out their statistical information about the composition of their workforce and file it with CPB, as well as keep it publicly available at their main location and at any other location where more than 5 full-time employees are assigned to work. In addition to that on the EEO front, starting this year, is as part of the general eligibility criteria for our grant programs, in addition to the 5 things in the Communications Act, in order to distribute funds, what CPB has to do is we have to hold consultations with the public broadcasting community to establish criteria by which we will grant funds, operational funds in the CSG, the Community Service Grant Program, out to stations. These general eligibility criteria are made contractual provisions when the station accepts a grant from CPB that they will comply with these in order to maintain their eligibility for the program. What is interesting from an EEO perspective this year, starting in FY 2012, every few years we have these consultations. 2 years ago we did television, coming up is radio. But what came out of these consultation panels in 2010 for televisions is a diversity initiative, which has become effective this year for the FY 2012 Community Service Grant eligibility, and is made now part of the grant provisions for starting this year. And what that is, and when I say diversity here, we actually define it more broadly. We say diversity, we mean a broad range of characteristics, including but not limited to gender, race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, and economic status. That as a condition of eligibility for the TV Community Service Grant Program, grantees must certify that they have established the formal goal of diversity for their workforce management boards, including their community advisory boards and governing boards, and have implemented the following to achieve these goals. First, that they have reviewed with the station's governing board and licensee officials those practices that are designed to fulfill the station's commitment to diversity and meet the applicable FCC guidelines. Secondly, they've completed an annual report of the organization's hiring goals, guidelines, employment statistics, and actions undertaken to satisfy this diversity eligibility policy and post that report on the station's website. And thirdly, that they've implemented formal diversity training programs for management and appropriate staff. In addition, grantees also must undertake one of the following four initiatives. First, that they've included individuals representing diverse groups in internships or work-study programs designed to provide meaningful professional level experience in order to reflect the diversity of the community and further public broadcasting's commitment to education, or include qualified diverse candidates in any slate of candidates for elected governing boards for which the grantee controls, or implement a diversity training program for members of the organization's governing board on an annual basis, or participate in minority or other diversity job fairs. So there's a second set that these are now made contractual provisions that the stations must agree to comply with in order to continue to receive a community service grant from CPB. And then finally, one thing that the panel, the consultation panel suggested and the CPB board adopted is that public television grantees are strongly encouraged, although not required, to interview at least one qualified diversity candidate for any senior leadership position hire. And by that we mean CEO, COO, CFO, chief content officer, general manager, or other equivalent positions. So that is also encouraged. As I said, this is just on the TV side. The radio side, we do these consultations about every 3 years. Radio is starting this year. I would anticipate that something similar would come out of that panel, although, again, it's going forward, so we don't know yet. So that's sort of my perspective for this, that even though we aren't subject to the FCC's rules since we don't own any of the licenses, certainly we do sort of in a sort of parallel fashion, we are concerned and sort of monitor these things as well.
Thank you, Bob. Monica.
Good morning. I'm Monica Nettles Johnson. By title, I am the Director of Operations for the Roberts Broadcasting Group, which is an African-American owned group of stations. Our flagship is in St. Louis, Missouri, which is a My Network station, and then we also have 3 additional stations, one in Columbia, South Carolina, another one in Evansville, Indiana, and Jackson, Mississippi, which are CW affiliates. I am also responsible for programming and compliance for the group, so we kind of bring a unique, I would say, perspective because we make it a point to do outreach in diverse communities, outreach to people in places that wouldn't necessarily know that there are employment opportunities within the broadcast community. A lot of what I spend my time doing is going to different places, talking and letting people know that there's more to television than just hitting the on button on your remote. Because most people, once they turn it on, they see, anchors and news people, but they have really no clue as to what goes on behind the scenes. And so in one of our initiatives, we are partnering with a private high school as well as a public high school in our area, and we bring in kids who are interested in engineering and traffic and promotions and advertising and sales, just to let them shadow to see what is available out here so that everybody doesn't have to think that they can only be the sportscaster, because you need a lot of people behind the scenes in order to make the in front of the camera things work. I've been with the company about a little over 20 years, even though I don't look like that. No, thank you very much. I've been there that long and have had the opportunity to watch the whole marketplace change. When I first came to St. Louis, it was very definitive minority-majority community, and now that is shifting and we're getting various ethnicities in. So there's another organization that I'm beginning to do some work with just so that we can make sure that our employment notices are translated into proper languages, because we're getting a very heavy refugee community coming into the St. Louis area. And it's kind of our take that if we're going to do this and do it right, then people really do need to know what we're doing and what we have available, and you can't just necessarily limit it to what we've always done. So we're looking for creative ways to do and make sure that our station and the employment and the opportunities that are available are given to anyone who has an interest.
Thank you, Monica. Lori.
Hi, my name's Lori Cagonia, and I am from Vermont Public Radio, and we are obviously a nonprofit, non-commercial station, and I've been there about 14 years, and just in the past 2 years inherited the EEO package. So I feel that we're really fortunate that Vermont is such a small state, because our total population kind of makes up some of your cities. So it's not too hard for us to have a broad outreach, because there's not too far to outreach to. So it makes it pretty simpler for our perspective. And being a non-profit public entity, we really depend on our listeners to support our staff and our station, unless we get a grant from CPB. So it's pretty much part of our mission and our motto to include all of the community in everything that we do. So the initiatives in the EEO are really part of our day-to-day business. So that is kind of where we're at, and that's it.
Our next panelist is Cheryl Manley. Cheryl.
Good afternoon. I am by title the Vice President, Associate General Counsel, and Deputy Compliance Officer for Charter Communications. I am commonly referred to as the Labor and Employment Attorney. And as such, I am responsible for ensuring Charter's compliance with a number of various EEO regulations, including the FCC's EEO rules. I've been with Charter for approximately 7 years, and over that time I've seen the company's understanding of what their compliance obligations are evolve over the years, and I think due in large part to our partnership with our outside counsel and better educating our managers as to what the EEO rules are all about, that we not only seek to comply with the rules, but I think as an organization we're actually embracing what they're all about and what it means to do broad outreach. And in the previous panel there were a number of individuals who referred to the fact that it's good business. And I can say that over the years that I've been with Charter, I've seen that actually come to be the case, where they accept the fact that it's actually good business to follow the EEO rules. And like I said, we also have other EEO obligations as a federal contractor. Charter hires on average, we've got 16,000 plus employees, so on average per year we hire between 3,000 and 4,000 full-time employees every year. And we're spread out across the country, so we're in some urban areas and we're also in some rural areas. And it's a challenge, but one that I think that we meet in terms of making sure that we reach out to the communities and that our workforce actually reflects the communities. I am based out of St. Louis, which is Charter's headquarters, and we are still, as far as I know, the 4th largest cable company in the U.S.
Thank you, all of you. For those of you who are here this morning, our first panel focused a great deal on compliance issues, regulatory compliance with EEO rules, the nature of compliance, and some of the strictures that attend the application of those rules. And I think that the focus the latter half of the morning is on not just compliance but best practices. And so I sort of put this to each of you as you've, in your experience in your positions, looking at sort of outreach initiatives and your various organizations where you've had to make hires. If you could talk a little bit about success stories, where your companies have located successful candidates through outreach efforts. What are the ones that you feel have worked the best? And maybe we can talk about particular instances and for specific positions. And I know we'll start with Monica. I don't know if Bob, that really applies to you as well. So.
One of my greatest success stories actually happened this past May. I had been looking for a traffic coordinator, and we had gone through the standard newspaper placements and the Traffic Directors Guild and some other, standard broadcast pieces, and it wasn't turning up what I was looking for. So I sent some job descriptions to some churches. And out of a local congregation, there was a non-traditional African-American woman who was had gone back to school, was receiving a degree. And when you looked at her resume, it had absolutely nothing to do with broadcast. However, she had the necessary skill set that was transferable. So in looking at what she knew how to do and what we needed to have done, we were able to cross that bridge, and she's been with the company now about 7 or 8 months and is becoming an awesome traffic coordinator. But some days when it comes down to trying to, from my perspective, it's really meeting the spirit of the law. How to get the right people. I tend to end up looking for underdogs. there's got to be someone out here, you know, unemployment is horrible. And when talking about recruitment, one of the things that I really don't like is putting ads in the newspaper anymore because they're really not effective. And because unemployment is so high, the way that I write mine, my ads are very expensive because I literally do put screeners in so that I can get candidates that have the kind of qualifications that we're looking for. And this young woman was an absolute wonderful marriage. So looking in unusual places or creative places or some place that you wouldn't normally think about, the church community, especially, in my perspective, of course, is different because we are African American owned, we are in urban areas, and trying to make sure that we have a diverse workplace, it's a primary goal. And you can always find people to do what you need to have done. Some days you just have to look a little further or you have to look a little harder to find them. But when you do that, you will turn up some absolute jewels that will fit your organization and literally hit the ground running and be able to make excellent contributions. There's another young woman, she interned for me, as a matter of fact. Our CEO knows that I don't like interns. For whatever reason in St. Louis, people that want to intern, they're starstruck in television stations. They want to be in front of the camera. They don't know how to run camera. They don't know how to pull cables. They don't know how to edit. They don't know how to do a lot of things. So the CEO brought someone to me, and he prefaced the introduction by telling this person she doesn't like interns, but talk to her anyway. And I talked to her, didn't do anything initially, but this young woman called, and she 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 kept calling, and she kept calling. And she was really talented at calling me right at a point in time where I was busy doing something and didn't want to talk to an intern or a potential intern. But because of her tenacity and she just kept calling. One day I just stopped what I was doing and said, if you can be here in 20 minutes, we can talk. She got there in 15. We talked. I brought her on as an intern. She was excellent. And the unique thing that I have in St. Louis is we are a non-union station. So interns can actually do more than at some of the other stations, because I've had some other people who have interned at different places to tell me that they didn't get to do anything really at the other locations because they were all union shops. This woman, she came in, she hit the ground running, she made impact, and I wholeheartedly wrote recommendations for her, and she went on to become the assistant assignment editor at the NBC station there in St. Louis. So, you know, when you look and when you work with people, and I do work people, when I'm going to deal with an intern, you have to have something that I see worthwhile, because I'm going to push you. I'm going to get on your nerves. I'm going to aggravate you because somebody did that with me. I wouldn't be where I am today if someone hadn't poured into me. So I take it as a responsibility that if I'm going to be working with people, it's my responsibility to pour something into them so that when they leave me, they're able not only to make impact, but they can also pay it forward and pour into somebody else. So we've had some very good experiences by being creative and looking in unusual places.
Any others? I mean, Monica mentioned outreach to churches and tenacious would-be interns, but are there any other examples of outreach initiatives that your companies have engaged in that you found particularly successful?
I can think of one that came up in one of our markets in the Northwest, and I thought this was pretty creative. The systems that we operate in that area are fairly rural, and it's difficult to find qualified technicians or even sometimes customer service representatives to work in some of the offices. And what the recruiter did in this area is that she went to one of the women's shelters, so a shelter where perhaps homeless or abused women had gone. And she started working with the director at one of those centers and was actually able to find some qualified women who were hungry for a job and were willing to work hard, and we ended up hiring at least one that I'm aware of where it actually worked out. So I thought that that was fairly creative, and in a way that they reached out into the community, deep into the community, in an area where it's tough to find qualified candidates.
You know, Lori, I don't think of Vermont as an area that's very heterogeneous, so I wonder how you look at diversity, how you recruit for diverse candidates, and what have you found to be successful in your efforts?
Yeah, we are, we only have like a 5% of the population that are non-Caucasian, so it does make it a little difficult. What we have found, though, is that we have 4 universities really close by, and so we tend to, various staff members go to a lot of job fairs at these schools. A couple of our staff members actually teach some classes about broadcasting at these particular colleges. So we're reaching people not only from Vermont, but any of these students that have come to Vermont to be at our schools. And we also do, because we are community-driven and rely on our listeners, we sponsor, every year we have a listeners picnic, and we move all around the state. Each year it's at a different location, and we really push that information out to the individual schools, even high schools. And we've actually had some hires from that, where somebody has just walked in off the street from the picnic and said, "Hey, I want to work at public radio, and I want to work at Vermont Public Radio, so do you have any openings?" And we did, and we ended up hiring her, and then she hooked us up with some other people through her church group who came to volunteer with us, and then became, we ended up then hiring as part-time and then full-time. And we do a lot of, we look more to try to get younger folks interested into public radio. And a lot of it is tours, and we participate a lot with our community centers.
I think just sort of to piggyback on that a little bit, I mean, outreach is such a fundamental part of public broadcasting, and not just through employment, but through all aspects of public broadcasting, the constant engagement with the community. Again, not just when looking at staffing, but also, you know, when you do you know, programs like, you know, the Forgetting, which is about Alzheimer's, and like, you know, to go out and partner with other organizations. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's sort of the lifeblood of public broadcasting, is this constant partnering with other institutions in the communities that we serve. That it is sort of again, not just with staffing, but being in constant contact is such a lifeblood for public broadcasting. I mean, you know, CPB, you know, because we are just in Washington, and we do rely on the self-certification of the stations we support. I mean, we only kind of hear about it, you know, when things go horribly awry and someone complains that they're falsely certifying these things. But I mean, just the way the public broadcasting model works, this constant engagement with all facets of the community. I mean, it really does. You find these stories of people just kind of coming in because they want to be part of that institution that is sort of, you know, part of the fabric of the community. It's not. It really, that's how public broadcasting, you know, that's our lifeblood, really. So
there was an issue. I think a point that was raised both by Bob and Monica that I want to ask a little bit about, and it really goes to how we define diversity. You know, Monica, you mentioned the refugee community in St. Louis, and Bob, you in talking about CPB's approach to the issue, you indicated in defining diversity, it's including but not limited to race and gender and so forth. One of the questions that we, of course, are charged with looking at here at the FCC is sort of that deeper question of what does diversity mean? How do we get beyond sort of what we sort of consider as a traditional criteria for diverse communities, being ethnic diversity? But there are certainly other criteria for diversity. So I'd sort of like each of you to talk about that. How do you define it? And secondly, how do you measure your success? I mean, obviously there are many, many ways to recruit personnel, but when you're running a business, you have to have metrics when you're looking at the cost of that outreach initiative and what you're getting back as a result of it. So I know that was a lot, but really talking about diversity and sort of performance metrics in your outreach initiatives.
You know, for us, and listening to the panel that recommended us to sort of adopt this, or our board to adopt this, you know, really, I think there was a lot of talking, and there's language in the Public Broadcasting Act about this too, about that stations should be reflective of the communities that they serve. And as such, I don't think there is any sort of one definition of diversity that we can settle on as far as, you know, diversity means the following things. I mean, yes, you know, from a legal perspective, there are certain, there's a whole body of law, you know, with certain demographics, you know, are protected and not. But I think we looked at it more from a holistic standpoint of you know, is diversity, you know, diversity in St. Louis is going to be very different than diversity in Vermont. And there is no one size fits all, which is why we did say this is, you know, including but not limited to, so to allow the stations to have flexibility to be, you know, reflective of their communities. And how we measure that, I think is going forward, you know, looking how well the stations serve their community and how well they in fact are reflective of their communities from which they derive their support.
So at Charter, I would say that we define diversity to mean much more, obviously, than just race and gender. We're also looking at individuals who are diverse based on perhaps whether they suffer from some sort of disability. We have one facility in Kentucky that was actually recognized by the city of Louisville because of their outreach efforts in hiring individuals who had a vision impairment. So we brought them into the call centers. We were able to work with them so that those individuals who came to work with us, they reflect the community. And we were able to work with them and to bring them on. I also think about the fact that we've got veterans who are coming back from, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq, or maybe they've been deployed elsewhere, and they get out of the military and they're looking for employment as well. So that, to me, hiring those individuals reflects our community as well, and that, to me, is also how we define diversity in terms of hiring veterans. And Monica's already mentioned that in St. Louis, we do have, I mean, for years and years, to me, it was kind of just black and white, but there are other individuals who are coming over from other countries as refugees, and we make an effort to reach out to those communities in terms of our recruiting as well. I think you asked the question, so how do we measure whether we're successful in our efforts? And I'd be the first one to say that that's tough. How do we measure whether we're successful? I'd like to think when I look around at our various locations that our employees do reflect the community, and that in and of itself should be a measure of our success. It's not a requirement that a particular location have a certain number of minorities or females, et cetera. And from a performance perspective, it's not something that our managers are measured on. We're not there yet. But I think that when we look around at our workforce, at this point, the way that we know if we're successful is if it reflects the community in which we operate.
Yeah, I would have to say pretty much the same thing for Vermont Public Radio as well, is that for us, diversity is representation of the community. and our workforce is, well, part of public broadcasting is a community, and as such, so is our station. And so for us, our staff is a mixture between, 20 and 70 years of age, and from all walks of life, and people that have moved to Vermont specifically to be part of our company, and bring all sorts of different skill sets that kind of accentuate each other. And the fact that our station is doing very well, given the economy and the way things are, and being a public radio station, is a way that we sort of measure how we are. That by the diversity of the different groups of ages and skill sets, we have individual connections to the community, and as a whole, we have connections.
Can you speak to that? I know you work for the Roberts companies, and actually, just as a plug, Steve is on our advisory committee, so I'll be reporting back to him. But obviously, working with a minority company, minority broadcasters, how do you look at diversity within your company, and how do you define it?
I have really taken the position that this is a television group that happens to be owned by African American people, and that if we're going to do this right, we need to make sure that we are getting to everyone in the community. So from a recruitment standpoint, it has been a combination of broad and targeted. I look to make sure that organizations, in my time there, no organization has ever asked to be notified for a recruitment placement. However, I've just taken the position that in order for us to do what we need to do, I send these to different organizations so that they are aware that this is an opportunity. I do a lot of work with trade schools and churches and just little pocket areas to make sure that we get people that look like the community. I agree with Cheryl. When I first came to St. Louis, it was very black and white, and that was it. And I had come to St. Louis from Chicago, and I was literally trying to find some international food, and I was challenged because it just wasn't there. But over time, various ethnicities have moved into the region, and so now when you come into the office, there are different places, especially on breaks. You will hear fluent Spanish, you will hear fluent French, you will hear Mandarin, you will hear various native tongues being spoken as people are on their cell phones having their own personal private conversations. So the measurement for us, when you look around the company, you automatically see a diverse grouping of people that have various skill sets. We have young, we have old, we have all the mixture possible to be able to bring a dedicated, competent workforce to the company to make sure that we get our work done.
Let me ask you all a question that occurred. One of the issues was raised in the panel earlier was the effectiveness of placing ads in papers in the classifieds, and how the classifieds obviously in this day and age aren't used as readily as Craigslist and Monster.com, all of the internet available sites for recruitment. But overlaid on that is the fact that in this country, broadband penetration, when we're talking about home use, is really only about 65 to 68% in that. So there's at least a third of the country that's not online. So my question really goes to recruitment that we're doing using traditional means, and how your company handles that, and what you think of that, and also colored by that is sort of your understanding of broadband penetration in communities that don't necessarily have internet access as do some. So if you could all speak to that, we can start with Cheryl.
Sure. As I've already mentioned, Charter operates in some rural areas, so I certainly understand the fact that internet is not available to all of the communities that we serve. Video is, though. And what a lot of our recruiters have started doing recently, and I would say over the past year, in fact, is that we have a site that's available on our on-demand station where we post all of our jobs. And so individuals who may not have access to the internet, they do have access to see the jobs that are available on demand. And they don't have to be a subscriber to any of our premium channels in order to access those jobs that are posted out there. We also use, well, obviously we're going to advertise in some newspapers, so we use newspapers. I'm not sure how effective that is in terms of bringing in viable candidates, but I do know that in some markets we still advertise in the newspaper. We obviously make sure that we are contacting in every single one of our markets the state employment division. But of course, my understanding now is that they're online as well. So, but we do make sure that we reach out that way. We're also using some organizations such as the NAACP. We're going to use the Urban League. And so if there are individuals who don't have access to the internet, but maybe they're connected with the NAACP or the Urban League, then they should be able to find out about opportunities. We go to not only four-year universities and the two-year community colleges, but we're also recruiting at trade schools. So if there happened to be a segment who maybe didn't have internet access, but maybe they're in trade school or they know somebody in trade school, then we're going to be able to recruit from those as well. And then finally, again, depending upon the market and the area of the country, we're going to either participate in job fairs, host a job fair, or maybe even co-sponsor a job fair. So if that, I would imagine, again, if somebody did not have internet access, if they heard about a job fair, whether it was advertised on the radio or on the TV, that they would maybe be able to make it to a job fair to learn about opportunities with Charter.
Anyone else want to address the issue of internet access and classifieds?
Well, obviously in Vermont, we struggle with internet access for a good chunk of the state. So we do use a couple of the local, or I say local newspapers, two newspapers that penetrate the state. So then that seems to be effective. And then for us, obviously our on-air product, we deliver the message from folks that listen. We have quite a huge listenership. And then some of it is just through staff word of mouth and out to the local community, through colleges and through the universities, through the churches, is how we kind of get them out. We do use internet a lot as far as the CPB and PR job lines, the ARWT career line, and we also do listservs a lot as well.
I do a lot of the similar things that Cheryl and Lori have mentioned, but one of the other things that I use are minority newspapers in whatever the cities are that we are looking for people. Columbia, South Carolina, for whatever reason, only has what they call the state newspaper. It is one newspaper that covers the entire state of South Carolina, which I still haven't figured out how they do that, because I kind of figure something would be happening in the northern section that would not necessarily be of interest to the southern, but because that's how they are, I supplement with use of the African American papers that are in that area. And for the most part, that's just a standard practice for us. We use minority newspapers in addition to the state job agencies, career placement offices, and we're dealing, especially with our master control people, that's a job that it's teachable, so you don't necessarily have to have an engineering degree, but we still need some people that know some basic engineering functions. So the state employment services have been very, very good actually at getting candidates for us, as well as there in St. Louis, there are a couple of broadcast-specific trade schools. And those two have been some very good resources for us to use to find people to fill some very specific jobs for the full, master control is like the heart of the operation. And you need some people that have an understanding. You don't necessarily need a BSEE, but as long as you can make sure that the operation is functioning, we've been successful with that.
I mean, at this point, like, my answer to kind of everything they've said is yes. It isn't just the paper. It isn't just internet. It's also strategic partnering with various organizations, to get the word out. People that have expressed interest or organizations that have expressed interest. It is kind of the all of the above. It's.
So Tom, I did want to add that. So even though we have all of these other resources in terms of recruitment, so through agencies, schools, job fairs, et cetera, candidates still have to apply online, and that's the only way to apply for a job with Charter. We don't have paper applications anymore. And in order to facilitate a candidate who might be interested in an opportunity with Charter if they don't have internet access, number one, you can go, at a library or something like that, they could get to the application, they could get to Charter's career site. But also in our offices, we have kiosks set up. So even if someone didn't have internet access at their home in our various offices, they could come in and apply for a job online at one of our computer kiosks. So I did want to clarify that. We recruit in different ways, but the only way to apply for a job is online.
And as you may not know, have you seen situations where there have been individual candidates who haven't had sort of home access, but they've been able to apply anyway? Or what's been your observation of how that's worked?
I probably don't know, Tom, but if they learned of a job, so maybe it's through the Urban League, maybe they go down to the Urban League every week or every month, and they learn of a job opportunity through the Urban League, then the direction would be that you go to Charter's career site, and I am assuming that the further direction would be that even if you can't get to a library, or maybe you don't know how to use the library computer, that if you came to one of Charter's various offices, that we have a kiosk set up there, and there's also someone there to guide someone through that application, that online application process.
Lori and Monica, do Vermont Public Radio and the Roberts companies, do they have similar application processes, online only, or do you have a dual system?
We try to push for online only, but we do still receive some that are walk-ins and some that are through the mail. And I had forgot to mention before, we use social media a lot for public radio, and a lot of word of mouth, but we're trying to do online applications. It's just easier to track and keep control of.
We do both. We get a lot of walk-in traffic. The offices are in the African American community. They're in North St. Louis, and right on a major street. And one day a young man walked in. Literally, there's a White Castle hamburger place across the street, and he had been to White Castle, and we have a huge TV 46 on the top of the building, and you can see 6 or 7 satellite dishes. And I don't know what piqued this young man's curiosity, but he left White Castle with his bag of burgers and walked across the street and just walked in and said, "I want a job," told that to the receptionist, so the receptionist called me. And I just have a pet peeve about people walking in off the street. If our offices were downtown, there would be a little more respect. But that doesn't really matter. So I walked on out and talked to the young man. And White Castle hamburgers have a unique smell. Oh my God, they're unique. And I mean, he was an absolute urban kid. And I talked to him, and my first inclination was to say, you know, you really need to dress up and do this better and come back. But one of the reasons that we take walk-ins, that we take paper applications, we are finding there in St. Louis, there are a lot of hoops that people have to jump through in order to get to employment. Some people don't have access to computers. And so instead of, well, you're not dressed right, come back. Come on in, here's the paper, sit down here in the front office, fill out the application, and they'll call me when you're finished. And in some instances, I'll just do an initial screening right there. Just because if we're going, and again, it just kind of goes back to my philosophy, if we're going to do this, everybody may not necessarily know how to dress correctly and come to an office and present themselves, but that could be the very candidate, the very diamond in the rough that we need to have, but because it wasn't wrapped up in Resume 101 school or whatever, you know, we might be turning away people who would absolutely be able to make contributions. So, you know, we make it a point, we take things online, we take walk-in, we do paper, just to, you know, kind of eliminate hoops so that we can find the people we need.
I've got a couple online questions I want to share with you. The first one, this one's for Bob, and it says, in order to ensure including at least one minority candidate and those selected for interview for a high-level position, as CPB is now recommending, should we be asking candidates to self-identify themselves as a minority in the initial application?
Well, again, this isn't the senior leadership position hire is just a recommendation. It's not a requirement. I don't think necessarily we would recommend one way or the other. Just, I mean, in a way that basically what I think the panel was going to, when the board adopted this, they were going to is to you know, however it happens, you know, that it would be a good thing to have a diverse pool of applicants for your senior leadership positions. That there's not, again, this is one of those, there's not necessarily one way to Rome. That however it happens, that it would be, we are encouraging our stations to do so. Again, not saying that one way is better than the other. That there's many ways to ensure that you have a diverse group of candidates that however the station finds it best.
And I could see that that'd be rife with legal issues.
Oh yes.
I've always found that at least in the selection process, determining background is a subtle exercise. Maybe some of the other panelists could speak to that. I mean, as you're culling through candidates, determining the diversity angle. First, if that's a priority, and second, how are you identifying candidates that may fit that criteria for you? Sure.
We ask candidates to self-identify. It's voluntary. And then that's part of the application. It's segmented from the part where they list their qualifications, prior experience, etc. So we don't really know when we're reviewing the resumes and applications whether that individual is a minority. But that's where our recruitment comes into play, because if we're doing what we should be doing in terms of recruiting, so reaching out broadly, then the presumption is that your applicant pool is going to include some of the diverse candidates. So if we're reaching out to veterans organizations, or we're reaching out to organizations where disabled individuals go, or we're reaching out to certain ethnic newspapers or trade publications, then presumably the applicant pool is going to be reflective of those individuals. And then when the recruiter and the hiring manager are reviewing the applications, they should be looking for the best qualified candidates. There is no effort, and boy, I really hope so, no effort to determine somebody's diversity, whether they're a minority or not, by reviewing the applications. That comes into play on the front end, how we recruit and how effective we are at recruiting.
I've got another online question. Okay. It says, are there trade listservs that you have found useful in finding candidates? If so, which ones? And I'll just address that to the whole panel. Maybe, Laura, you may want to start us off on that one.
Yeah, a couple of the listservs that we use is the PRNDI, which is the Public Radio News Directors, and Pub Radio listserv, and that works well for, obviously, the public radio stations.
I have one last question really on outreach initiatives. We've been talking about sort of best practices. I'd be interested to know, and I'm sure others would be, as you sort of walk through the menu of different outreach strategies. We've talked about some that have been very effective in terms of reaching diverse communities. What strategies and initiatives have you found to be least effective in your travels, in your experience?
Well, I don't really have an answer for that because the initiatives that I pursue are based on what's good for the business. What's good for the business, what fits in our time constraint, what fits in our staffing, what fits in the budget. And I really have not ventured into areas that didn't kind of meet that criteria so that we could actually be involved.
I was going to say, I sort of the same thing. It's kind of hard, and as hard as it is to say what the success metrics is, I mean, to say that something's not effective, if you're looking at, if you sent notices, like 100 notices to an organization, but then they did find a great candidate came out from that particular organization, I mean, that's still a success. So, I mean, it's really kind of hard to say that one particular method hasn't been successful because you like Monica was just saying, you never know where that diamond lies.
I feel the same way. I don't know if there's any particular option that is ineffective, and I agree with Monica.
Well, this question is from Janelle Trigg. Do you use outside counsel to assist in EEO compliance? If so, how best can outside counsel provide assistance? What do you need? We'll start with Cheryl. I imagine.
Yes, we use outside counsel. They're critical. How they best assist us is making sure that our recruiters who are spread out across the country understand what the rules are. So we, meaning my team internally, we provide training sessions twice a year on what the rules require. We answer questions, we explain what the public file report is, we explain how to complete it. But our outside counsel is there to help answer some of the other questions related to supplemental recruitment initiatives, what should count, helping us to figure out the recruitment source that was used for a particular hire when we're struggling to work with our own automated applicant tracking system and how we make all of this work in order to prepare the public file report. Outside counsel is also critical in helping us through an audit to make sure that we are fully and appropriately addressing the questions that are posed by the Commission. So we use our outside counsel all the time to help ensure our compliance.
Yeah, I would say the same. We use outside counsel. We use Melody. She's wonderful. And we use it pretty much for the same thing. Is, you know, we'll quickly shoot off an email and say, so we're thinking of doing this. Does this meet as one of the initiatives, or, you know, do we really have to do this, or if we've got a part-time person and it's only going to be temporary, do we need to recruit? And I think it's a great tool to have and a great resource.
Well, I used outside counsel. I'd say they were my best stealth weapon. When the rules changed initially, I had some internal resistance from some of our general managers and other people who were older than me and thought I didn't know what I was doing. So they were trying to tell me how the rules were supposed to go and how recruitment was supposed to be handled, and I kept telling them, no, it's different now. And, you know, when you're dealing with the old boys network, they were trying to, you know, I'm a girl, what do I know? So I'd fire off emails to our council and saying, well, it's my understanding that the rule is da-da-da-da-da-da-da, am I right? Or if not, please let me know. And they would either say, yes, you are, or give me some adjustment, whichever. And so, you know, I just became the dragon lady. No, this is how it is. This is what has to happen. And so they were kind of my helpful iron hammer to make sure that everybody got in line to understand what had to be done.
So one of the things that we say always when talking with stations about not only the stuff they have to do for us, but, you know, that even EEO, but even beyond that, employment law is such an amazingly complex and ever-changing area that constant contact with your counsel is absolutely vital.
Cheryl, you mentioned the annual compliance report. I want to ask a couple questions about that, really about data collection and management. And this is really for the whole panel. Sort of what recommendations do you have for maintaining data about your job postings? In other words, what are the best tools that you've used in terms of maintaining hiring records and preparing your annual public reports?
We actually use a software program, and I think it's actually web-based. So we use a vendor that helps us track all of the applicants, which is one of the reasons that we require online applications only. So we're able to track all of the applicants. We have built into this applicant tracking system a means for applicants to identify the recruitment source that they use to find out about the job. And at the end of the year, we're able to extrapolate the data from the applicant tracking system. And for the most part, the public file report is fairly automated. Where we struggle, and I don't know if this comes as a recommendation, but it just, I guess where we struggle is we, Charter, may post jobs on Monster and on Charter's career site, on charter.com. However, there are so many internet job boards now that scrape, I think that's the right term, from Monster and charter.com. So a candidate may say, I found out about this job from, I don't know, Indeed, for example. We don't post jobs on Indeed, but Indeed may scrape from charter.com and Monster. So we struggle with the actual recruitment source, and what we've actually found is that there's no way for that to be an automated process. When we get to preparing the public file report, that's much more manual for us because we have to kind of clean that up. If we don't use Indeed as a recruitment source, then we can't list it on the public file report. And we're finding that to be the case more and more because Indeed is just one example. I'm sure there are lots of other boards that scrape and where candidates find out about opportunities.
Lori and Monica, how have you addressed that issue as well? The annual public reports, maintaining data, tracking recruitment sources, that type of thing.
For us, it's all done manually. I track everything. And for what I found to just be the easiest tool is I've put together a bunch of forms of the specific things I need to know, and whenever somebody says, okay, we need to hire a position, I immediately give that hiring supervisor the packet and say, when this is what I need, and you can't hire anybody until you've got these things done and get them back to me when they're finished. And then I just put them in folders and in a specific place so that when it comes time for EEO filing, we have a generic template pretty much, which has been pretty simple, and I just grab the data from there and pull it in. And unlike these other ladies, we have a small amount of hiring that we actually have to do as far as recruitment sources, so it's pretty simple of the recruitment sources we use as to where they came from. And we do the same thing. We put it on our application and just say, can you tell us where you heard about the job?
I do the same thing. Our process is all manual, but because I am responsible for compliance, I just decided we'll funnel everything out of my office. So even I place all the ads, everything starts in my office, goes across the group. Even the applicants return all their information back to me, and that way I can keep track of where the candidate came from before the information gets disseminated to the respective cities for those hiring managers to make their decisions. And like Lori, I've made forms, and everyone has it, and this can't happen until I get the paperwork, and if I don't have the paperwork, then you have to hear from me, and they'd rather not. So it works out.
Have any of your companies ever been the subject of an FCC audit? And if so, how have you handled preparing your response to the audit?
Our Carolina station was audited, I think in 2005, 5 or 6. But because I used to work in a library, so I'm really linear. And so just in the whole process, I've just made sure that literally, if necessary, I have to over-collect information so that when I have to go back and say, this is what we did, this is how we did it, this is who it was, all I have to do is go to the file and I can pull it all up. And, we use Wide Orbit as our traffic system. So Wide Orbit tracks data from the time you input it ad infinitum. So I could go back and pull up the run schedule of the on-air announcements that we had made for whatever the position was, and I could pull that report, and you could see that we had run a 30-second spot for, I don't know, 500 however many times over the course of here to here. Anytime I do placements, people have to send me tear sheets. So I had probably 2 inches or so of documentation to be able to send in to the commission to say, this is where we did this, here's the majority paper, here's the minority paper, here's the on-air, here are the letters that we sent to community organizations, and it was like, oh, okay. But if you do not keep paperwork, there's going to be a problem, because documentation is key.
Yeah, I would say the same. We just got audited last year, and it went smoother than I had anticipated it would go, and a lot of it was because we are paper heavy, so everything comes back through my office, and I just keep everything on my paper hog. So everything's filed, and then it was just kind of the letter tells you what you need. Melody's there for backup when I need to know for sure. So exactly what does this mean? And then just pull the appropriate documents and send it through, and now we're just awaiting the answer of how we did.
We've been talking a little bit about community organizations, your outreach to community organizations, church organizations, and others. I think, as you all know, these organizations, based on the EEO rules, are entitled to request notification of job openings, but many of them aren't even aware that they're entitled to do that because they're not FCC licensees. So my question is, have you had any experience with community organizations that were aware of this? How did they approach you? And if they have, generally what kind of organizations are they, and how did they become aware that they had that right? If that's appropriate for any of your experience.
I've had no experience. I started doing broadcast management when I I launched a station in Chicago in the mid-'80s, and from then until now, I've never had an organization ask to be notified.
I'm also not aware of any request by an organization for a listing of our job postings.
We're approaching the close of our hour. Actually, we've gone a little bit over. But I've got one follow-up question for all of you, and I'm going to ask this one online question. Let me make sure I understand it first. Well, this one says, what do you recommend when you run an ad and receive hundreds of resumes? You then send out postcards to those applicants you are not interested in, and they do not reply. Therefore, you cannot accurately track them, i.e., gender, ethnicity, etc. And I guess the second prong of this is, when do you collect the gender, ethnicity data? Does that question make sense? Cheryl, you want to start?
It makes sense to me. Again, I go back to the fact that we only accept applications online, so you have to apply online. And at that point, the candidate is given the option to self-identify their gender and race. So we're able to collect the information at the time the individual applies, if they choose to provide it to us. We don't send postcards anymore. We respond via email. If an applicant is not going to be considered further for that particular opening.
Yeah, we respond by email as well, and yeah, we found that most effective.
All right, well, we're going to close up. I've got one last question for each of you, and Bob, this may be less applicable, but I want to hear your closing remarks as well. It's sort of two-pronged. The first part is what's the biggest obstacle that you see to obtaining, that you've seen or do see to obtaining qualified candidates for various positions in your companies? And sort of a related question is, as we're thinking about individuals who are interested in working in media, what would be your advice to them in terms of what they should do to best position themselves to get noticed? Maybe Monica, you can start this.
I think I'll work backwards. My best recommendation to anyone who's interested in getting into media would be find someone that would be a mentor. Find somewhere that they can shadow and get some real world experience. A lot of what I've seen in St. Louis, people go to school, and when they come knock on the door and get the interview, one of my first questions is, well, number one, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they kind of look at me like, I don't know. Okay, that's an okay answer. But then the next question is, if you want to do broadcast, what can you do? And they'll start reciting, well, I went to this class and I went to that class, and most of it's theory. But the actual ability to write, to produce, to direct, to read teleprompter, and reading a teleprompter is not as easy as most people make it look. You know, can you write copy? Can you sell something? What can you do? And I generally get the blank stare at that point. So getting out, interning, whether it's at a broadcast facility, an ad agency, wherever you can go and get some real hands-on, that's definitely an advantage for anybody coming in the door.
Students often have facilities that are on campus that they can work with, I guess, to get some of that.
Some do.
Okay.
But then, unfortunately, there are people who are teaching class that I have seen that really shouldn't be teaching class because they just haven't gotten to the place where they can impart something so that the student then is able to make an impact when they walk in the door. And I love theory. I love reading, and class is excellent, and being able to say I've got a 4.0 or whatever that grade point average is, that's nice. But if you want to come work for me, at the end of the day, the Roberts Companies is a small business. And so I need to be able to make an effective hire where someone is going to be able to walk in the door and be able to make impact. I don't mind teaching and training and refining, but if I have to teach you the whole thing from the very beginning, I'm sure that there's going to be another candidate in the pile that I have that will be able to do more faster than some of the other students, if you will. That's why I'm just really a proponent of getting someplace so that you can get some shadow.
Bob, advice to prospective applicants?
Prospective applicants, you know, it's kind of the old school stuff about, make sure, your resume doesn't have typos, that you follow up with a thank you note, that sort of that personal interaction, that so the person at the other side of the desk knows you're interested and really knows you're interested. And then, like, from a public broadcasting standpoint, I mean, like what Monica was just saying actually rang really true. Most public broadcasting stations are very small, and that they rely on volunteers and things like that. But anything you can get to get experience to make you stand out amongst the rest. Because again, a lot of times, if it's a small business, they don't have time, to teach you all aspects. You've got to kind of walk in knowing something, and then whether it's an internship or whatever, just get something. But really, I mean, the number one thing, and this isn't really necessarily, is show interest and attention to detail. That you.
Lori and Cheryl, but Lori first, going back to the first prong of that question, sort of the biggest obstacle you found in recruiting talent.
Actually, we haven't had a big obstacle because most of the people that apply for our jobs want to be in public radio. And so as soon as they see the opening, they're anxious to come. And so we really haven't had much difficulty.
As a cable operator, and with all of the technological advances over the past decade or so, I would say probably the biggest obstacle is finding individuals, candidates who have that technology acumen, and even more so among women. There are not as many women out there who are technologically savvy. And that would actually be my advice for somebody who's looking for a job is computer science, engineering, it's the way to go. I mean, when I think about all of the advances that we've made over the past decade and those that are coming down the pike, knowing the technology, understanding how to use it, fix it, build it, break it down, etc., would be key. In a company like Charter and probably a lot of other technology companies as well.
All right, well, we are well over our hour, and I know stomachs are grumbling, but first I'd really like to thank our panel. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for the information that you've provided. And I certainly hope you'll come back. So with that, I think we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.